hearings. This is our first hearing, and we're just going to start the day with LDCFM. I want to tell commissioners you got some additional information, updated information. It's nothing like budget hearings if you don't start with all new materials. So that's how this goes. For your packet. We're normally, when we do these hearings, we normally start with an overview, try to set the stage for you, and then jump into hearings. This year, we're going to do it a little different just because of the timing. And we're going to jump right into hearings, and we're going to close sort of with a summary overview at probably either Friday or on next Monday. So, and my hope is for these hearings, and commissioners have the schedule, but staff will kind of give an overview. And then we will have representatives from the department or agency here to answer questions and provide us more information. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Cammie, who's going to give a little overview and kind of orient commissioners to the materials. And then we'll jump into more questions.
Good morning, commissioners. This morning we start with emergency services. That includes several of our community partners and county departments. The first one is LDCFM, and the current agreement, with the city has a cost share established as the city paying 100% for fire services, county paying 100% for emergency medical services, and the county pays 30% of any cost that is determined as shared between fire and EMS services. LDCFM is proposing an expansion of station number 6 and anticipates the operating expenses to increase. I won't give you the number that I had written down. We've got new materials today, so just refer back to those materials for the current numbers. The city did have this included in their CIP funding as of last week. And so we want to make sure that this additional information is in front of you for the supplemental request, since there is that cost share factor. The cost share factor does have the ability to change depending on the ratio of fire and EMS personnel that are adopted, and that is a collaborative decision again. So those options showing the different cost share factor are also included in your book. LDCFM is also attempting to shift to their organizational structure from its current structure to a 4-person staffing model. Does that sound correct? I pulled this from your narrative, but they have included their what do you call the staffing? They've included their organizational chart, and so you can see those changes in their request. They're currently funded for annual CIP replacement of the ambulance, which is typical for us to include in the annual budget, and the additional small capital items are again another typical annual expense. So they are here today to visit with us. They can answer those questions better about if you have any questions about those. We also have ECC, which is our Emergency Communications Center. The cities in Douglas County have developed a new model working with WSU policy management consultants for calculating the city payments to the county for the 911 dispatch. Lawrence, Eudora, and Baldwin City will change their cost based on that agreement. And do you want that?
They're going to be here at 9:30.
Okay, so. And they'll be here at 9:30 to talk to us. The emergency telephone fund that we have collects the 911 fees according to Kansas statute, and we use that to maintain the 911 infrastructure. It simply pays the Motorola maintenance contract in addition to the emergency communications budget in the general fund. Emergency management's also part of this group, and they will be here later too. So we will talk about some of their information on outdoor warning siren system changes, and CFD1 will also be here later. So our first one, LDCFM, is here at the table and ready for discussion if you would like.
You guys want to walk us through where you're at in the city process? That might be a good place to start. have to push the button. You can take your own.
All right, good morning. I'm Mackenzie Zell, Fire Medical Data Analyst with Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical. So yeah, like it was mentioned before, the city has its own process. It's a little bit offset from the county process, which makes things very interesting. But we originally submitted our request in the operating budget and then also the CIP, the capital improvement project plan. And then there was a budget retreat with executive staff. And it was identified that the department needed to find cuts in our budget. And so with that, which is new to your packet today, we did cut $1.56 million from our operating budget. Yes, I think so. So
Please say that number one more time also, Mackenzie, sorry.
yeah, so I'm gonna give you three numbers. Our total cut was 1.56 million in our operating budget. Out of that, shared expenses was 928,000. So like Cammie mentioned, the 36% for Douglas County equals $334,000 out of the operating budget. And I believe that was updated in the memo that has been provided. It doesn't say that specifically in the memo. That was what I thought was sent to you guys last week, that I had just sent it to Chief. I just sent it to you. I just forwarded. So the spreadsheet is updated. So we went through line by line to figure out what we could cut.
So maybe this is too early for this, but if I'm understanding correctly, the city said they want your budget reduced by 5%, your operations budget, right? Is that what they,
That's a rough number.
okay, right, but
That's what it equates to. Yeah, roughly 5%.
they want a reduction in your operating budget. I'd be interested as a county to hear how that will impact services.
We think that we were able to find areas to reduce that allowed us to maintain services. There were no reductions to frontline operating personnel. There were no reductions to EMS service that were identified. The areas where we were able to find savings, for example, one was a request for some PPE that we had submitted, and we're looking for alternative funding sources for that. Wildland firefighting PPE, which in this case wouldn't have hit the county side of the budget, but we've applied for a grant for that as an alternative to including that in our budget. Some other areas where we found opportunities to save were in the cycle with which we replace vehicles. So if we extend that a little bit and work some of our staff vehicles longer, we can reduce that as a percentage of the annual expense for those staff vehicles if you were to cost it out.
Sorry to interrupt, Chief, but that's part of your CIP budget, wouldn't it be? Or is that general operating?
So
Okay.
previously it was a part of the vehicle replacement program, the VERP. Now that's in our operating budget.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt you.
No worries. So we did look at opportunities to save money or to reduce our expenses, but still maintain service. Our focus was on maintaining service, and that was our last our last area to look at. We did run an exercise that looked at reducing our service levels, but that didn't end up being necessary.
Guess I'd like to know, when did you have access to these numbers and why are we just now getting them? So I read everything you send me. I read it ahead of time. I come prepared with questions. Sitting down and having a whole new set of numbers and a new kind of paradigm is a little uncomfortable for me first thing on a budget morning meeting. So could this have been sent last night? I mean, why are we just getting it now?
Yes, this was done in the last 2 weeks, finalized was it Monday or like this Monday? So yes, we could have sent it last night. So we apologize for that.
I don't know.
I believe McKinsey's intent was to send that, but she ended up just sending it to me in that case. So I apologize for not forwarding that.
I'm just not sure how effective we can be in a budget meeting with a new set of thoughts into it. I mean, it's not just different numbers. So talk me through, you've got a 5% decrease in operational costs, but we still have kind of in your original recommendation at 20 new positions. So talk to me about those two ideas and how they work together.
So with the reductions that came out of the executive staff retreat, it's been communicated that none of our enhancements are being supported by the city.
So in the city's language, a new position is referred to as an enhancement, and of the positions we requested, we did not receive any of the enhancements.
I will add on real quick because it was mentioned earlier, the operating costs for the Station 6 expansion were not included in the 2024 operating budget because of the timeline to build that station out.
Did they give you any sense, did the city give you any sense on your CIP requests for 6 and 7 or?
So it's still in draft. However, we did provide the most up-to-date information that we have. Station 6 was included on the draft proposal from city finance and from the city manager's office to the city commission. Throughout that commission meeting, they discussed adding in the ambulance and the fire apparatus onto the plan where those were not originally supported or like they weren't originally recommended through the plan. I think it was an oversight. Just talking with the finance director. And so the other thing that came out of that commission meeting was the request to see the impact by adding Station 7 into the next CIP plan. So the recommendation. There's a meeting tomorrow internally within the city to update that plan to figure out how to balance it. And then the recommendation, I believe, is going to the commission on the 11th. So next Tuesday. And that'll be, I believe, the final proposed CIP.
Helpful, thank you. You did say ambulance, but I think you meant we would be responsible for the ambulance, the city.
So, yeah, as far as expenses go.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
However, the city has to provide those funds up front, so it has to be on the proposal.
I'm just reading and thinking out loud, which I have learned over time is not a good idea. So I'm going to hedge with that. Yeah. I asked about what the resultants are, and I'm reading here on page 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe page 4. It says a 5% result would increase overtime, decrease training compliance, decrease community reduction activities, and increase the demand on emergency services, right? Is that in addition to what you shared earlier, Chief, or?
It is. I think we have found a way to reduce expenses. Some areas, one area in particular where we did a lot of reduction was in training, but this is additional training that we offer external to the agency. I would like to highlight that wasn't an initiative of mine to focus on employee and personnel development and succession planning. And one of the areas where I am happy with the outcome of the city's budget plan is within employee development. We allocated additional funds for tuition reimbursement. This is in alignment with a change to our operating policy that requires additional levels of formal education when folks promote into formal leadership. So that is a highlight that I'd like to stress, but there were reductions to requests to attend conferences specific to leadership and fire service management.
And also we had mentioned the $1.56 million earlier for the cuts. $400,000 of that, $450,000 was related to dispatching. So dispatching, our finance department had given us the wrong number and then came back and said, hey, this can be a part of your cuts. So that was a major part of that.
Yeah, I need to explain that. So there's been lots of back and forth over the years on how dispatch is handled inside the LDCFM budget. The city allocates their charges related to dispatch to the two departments that benefit from dispatch, not the whole community that benefits from 911, but from the two departments that benefit, which would be the police department and LDCFM. In our agreement, we do not pay anything related to dispatch, but they still charge LDCFM as a part of their cost allocation model. Because as Cami mentioned, we just did the whole Wichita State thing to redo the percentages. The city was using the old numbers.
So they pulled dispatch out for for our percentage of the cost.
They do that always, but even in the part that they keep, that's still on them. They had an incorrect, just a clerical number, a clerical error on the number in their budget. So when they were able to solve that, that was $400,000. They didn't really have to cut. But it was solved through their budget process by getting the correct number in there. But on our world, that is different because we don't, that charge does not come back to us through LDCFM because we pay the first third automatically. And that comes direct, the county pays the first third. No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna ask Mackenzie, if you could just walk us through any specific changes to the request that you have for us in addition to just that overall 1.56 million. Sarah, were you gonna say that? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the easiest thing is any of our enhancements or expansions that were requested are no longer on the table. So that's a huge conversation part that can be cut out. To kind of highlight how we do our budget, we have 3 programs. We have support services, operations, and community risk reduction. Within each of those programs, we have our 3 buckets. What Cami mentioned earlier, the 100% City of Lawrence, which is fire, the shared 64%, and then DC EMS. So with the new agreement in 2021, all of the expenses LDCFM wide go through the city to be approved as expenses, even though we may receive revenue from Douglas County to reimburse us for that. Some of our major cuts that we can see, and this is anywhere from $1,000 to $450,000, which would be the dispatching, include licenses, dues, and subscriptions. So finding some things that we subscribed to before, or if we subscribed or had dues related to some of our membership to certain programs, figuring out who really needed that in the department, just take a deeper dive. Education, tuition, training, meeting expenses. Taxes, fees, and permits. This has to do directly with our parking situation and just reconfiguring how we're managing that down at Station 1 in the downtown parking. Rentals and leases, software and computer. Some things that we wanted to improve this year that we're going to hold off for. In the operations program, operating expenses, this would be getting the facilities cleaned instead of 2 times a week, just 1 time a week. And those are just in our admin building and our training facility, wearing apparel and PPE. We had planned to start prepping for the expansion in this category, just with some lead times. But with the new CIP proposal from the city and the timeline that it shows Station 6 opening, we were able to cut some of these costs. Non-capital equipment, the dispatching, repairs and maintenance on non-vehicles. So our other equipment that's used in the stations, just being a little bit more aware of our purchasing process within each of the stations and having a little bit more of, I don't want to say budget awareness again, but we're trying to teach everybody who has a purchasing card really what that process and balancing the budget looks like, and understanding that Let's go through a deeper process where if we need something, can we wait a year or can we buy something a little bit different, and just being a little bit smarter about that. And then the last thing was the vehicles and equipment that Chief mentioned that was a part of the vehicle replacement program prior.
I can add in a little more detail, when we're talking about non-capital equipment, that's for us, items under less than $20,000. One of the things we were looking at starting next year was an LDCFM specific drone program. But with our public safety partners, we feel like we do have access to drones. They're just not as, not under our direct control, if you will. We need to ask for requests. So between LPD and the sheriff's office, we do have access to those. We were looking at replacing some conference chairs and some training equipment with that, and decided that those can be deferred.
One of the issues that was flagged, and the reason for the many positions that were asked for was because of overtime. So now with these reductions, what does that then do to the amount of overtime and the costs associated with that, and also the burnout factor?
Yeah, that's a great question. We had looked at using the data that we have to identify what our ideal staffing level is, and through that ran a process that looked at our staffing factor and then relief factor. And relief factor is the number of FTEs that you need in order to essentially fill the seats and then cover the leave that you have. And we have leave categories that include sick leave or parenting time, time when we send people off for training. And we did identify in our enhancement requests that we needed 5 more positions to cover that. And those were not granted to us. And I think this will have an impact on overtime. We did look at the number of shifts that overtime would cover, and there was what I would estimate between 80 and 100 shifts that those 5 people would have reduced that need some type of overtime coverage. So we think that overtime is a huge impact on our agency. We hear it from our folks, and we know that it's expensive and does have that potential to cause burnout. So we're looking at some other strategies currently that don't include additional people at this point. One of those is in talking with labor about revisiting the way we cover special events. We cover approximately 250 special events over the course of a year. Most of those relate to KU. So we're working with our partners at KU and our labor group to see if there's alternative ways to cover those events that don't necessarily include forced overtime. Because a lot of the people you see providing EMS coverage at a KU athletic event or other event are there because we told them they had to be there. That was not their scheduled shift.
Just to follow up on that, or to flesh it out a little bit more, I don't expect that you have hard and fast numbers now. But I mean, do you have ballparks of about like what overtime is costing you in terms of sort of just an exorbitant expense, and what that contrasts to new positions that you believe could help mitigate that overtime? And then second question is, can you talk to us about what kind of payment or reimbursement you get for special event coverage in particular, and how that compares to your actual cost versus how much of the costs are reimbursed?
Kevin Joels, Division Chief. On the KU event specifically, and a majority of our special events that we attend, we'll call it that, we are reimbursed, and then that goes back into the general fund. So KU, we'll just talk about University of Kansas, they'll specifically, so if Chief and I are a paramedic and an EMT, regardless of the rank, whatever my overtime rate is and his overtime rate, even if it's different, we're reimbursed 100% plus 10% for administrative fees, or 20%, 15% on top of that for administrative fees. So that offsets that particular overtime. Most special events that are something that's not city or county related, we charge as well for a rate that is just the overtime rate, equal to whatever rank is working.
Thank you. That helps. And the reason I asked that, I just want to understand both the financial sort of impact of that, in addition to what the human and staffing impact of forced overtime, if that's what we're calling it. So, that's helpful. And maybe is it fair to say that most of the overtime is due to special events? Does that feel true? Or that's just a good amount of it and otherwise it's just capacity and coverage across the county for normal
Yeah,
EMS and fire?
I would say a significant number of our forced overtime events are because of special event coverage, and a forced overtime event could be 2 hours or it could be 24 hours. And so if we have a special event that requires 2 EMTs or 2 paramedics to be there for 2 hours, that would be an occurrence of forced overtime. The actual incidence of overtime on shift usually occurs in longer segments of time, 10 to 24 hours. So the number of events that we have of forced overtime is probably relatively higher for special events because they're shorter amounts of time and we may need more people for them. What's our typical staffing for a football game? 14 to 16, somewhere in there?
Yeah, it depends. It's 12 to 14. Basketball is 7. Most of our baseball, softball, things like that's just a 2-person medic truck. But like Chief's saying, there's the frequency and how that in 250, there's only 365 days in the year. So not that there's one every single day, there's occasionally 3 or 4 in a day. But when you're versing it towards overtime to cover shift, I would say that the hours probably outweigh on shift because we're in 24-hour increments as opposed to 2.
So on the memo that we provided on the second page, there's a table with the blue and white, and it shows our revenues separated out by those programs I mentioned earlier. And then below that shows expenditures. As far as revenues go, on the very far right, where we see 2024 requested at the very top, down to special events, our estimated revenue is $160,000. Right now, our overtime salaries projected for 2024 in the proposed budget is almost 1.2 million.
Like to switch to the capital, if everyone's okay with that, if you've got those questions. So when we look at expansion to station number 6 and your total number on the new one is 1725. I think that's the same as it was on the old one for 2024 of shared expenses. Does everybody see where I am? Can you describe what things are happening within that budget? Is it planning? Is it property acquisition? What's happening? And let me go where my thread is going. I'm trying to see what we can't commit to future. So just trying to see where we're thinking about now and in the future.
Yeah, great question. Those expenses are related to planning and property acquisition initially. We had the 2020 station expansion study that was complete and identified the 3 gap areas. We've been working with the city's GIS folks to rerun those numbers to make sure that they're still valid and also to ask the question, in what order should we expand? If, assuming we're not going to buy all 3 plots of land and build 3 new stations at the same time, where should we focus first? So we've started to do that, and because it looks like that's the direction we're headed, we're getting that one at a time direction from our CIP proposals, and so we've been looking at where can we get the most bang for our buck to make sure that we're developing our new stations in the most data-driven methodology, and including looking at new neighborhoods and where the city of Lawrence may expand. We're looking at the current and proposed annexations and including that, factoring that into our data. And the data is still fairly consistent in that we have the three holes in responses, at least in the city of Lawrence and on the south, the northwest and the north. So as we look at this for Station 6, it is looking like the southern hole is probably the one that needs to be addressed first. And I think that does also help out with our Douglas County ambulance response based on where the location is showing up on the computer as far as the most likely or most advantageous location.
Those 6 that's to be built sooner is more likely to hit that southern gap, and then is 7 for the northwest.
That is correct. The data is looking at the southern gap should be filled first.
That's so, and that's still in, 6 is still in your 24 budget.
I believe what's being proposed, which is not in our memo because it's not actually proposed yet, but just being a part of those meetings is going to be in the 2024, which is, I emailed you the breakdown
Yeah.
for Douglas County cost. And I think instead of the 2 or 3, so 2 years this year that we had proposed for 2024 and 2025. Last year we proposed 3 years. This year they're spreading it out to 4 years
On Station 6,
on Station 6.
this shows 2 years, unless I'm reading.
This
it
is
wrong.
because it was the last thing that we proposed, but
Oh.
the city, the last draft I saw for the city that they haven't published yet is at 4 years.
Can you get us that as soon as we can?
I think I'd sent that to you last week and that's when you
Oh,
responded.
that's your new one. Okay.
Yep.
And that one does not show ordering the ambulance in the first year.
That one does, it's in the second year.
Yeah, okay. So
Mhm.
clarify.
Yeah, it's the numbers that are 388
Mhm.
for 2024, 520 for the ambulance and 232
Yeah.
for Station 6. And then it goes up to about 1.6 million for the next 2 years.
Yep, so land acquisition, design, and then build.
Okay.
And commissioners, in your updated budget options, which I think you all have, it should include that.
Includes it, but
As you have.
do we have the ambulance? No, the ambulance replacements are separate from the ambulance for Station 6 that's listed here. Okay, thank you. Just need to say it out loud to make it make sense.
And the email that you had just read off of, that's what I would assume we're going to see proposed from the city next Tuesday.
So the order of operations is pretty tricky between city budget and county budget, and the county doesn't, even though we go first, we don't get a lot of say over like what positions the city chooses to add for LDCFM, even if we pay for some of those. So just my understanding, so you've met with city staff and this was what they recommended was the 5% cut and not supporting the additional positions but that hasn't gone through the city commission yet. So how far do we rely on that in terms of our budget? Maybe it's a Sarah question.
Yeah, it's Commissioner, this is sort of a dance every year. We don't time our processes perfectly together. So generally what happens, I don't know. I would say that by the time the proposed budget is actually released, we'll have a pretty solid sense of what the commissions, they do their process a little bit differently. I think the city manager goes a little farther in terms of developing that proposed budget than I do. I generally try to just set the table and let you all decide what you want to eat when. He decides the menu, how you eat, how quickly you eat, and how that process goes. If that, I take the analogy way past where it should have gone. So I think, but what I would say is at a certain point, if they decided to add certain things, I think I have enough conversation going with the city manager that if we've already sort of solidified where we're at, we'll figure out how to what we can do to make it work. This is an advantage of having reserves. Because we may be asked to use those fund balances and those reserves in 1 year to meet our obligation under our interlocal agreement with LDCFM and then build it into a next year's budget. I would say it's never really come to that. Generally, when I get the city manager's proposed budget, I sort of know where I think they're going to end up for LDCFM. I know that's not as concrete as you'd like.
Okay, this is a little bit in the weeds too, so
Yeah.
follow you there. In terms of new stations, the city can issue debt for those in ways that we can't. So we tend to save up and then pay reasonably amount of cash for some of those improvement projects. Is that the way it will happen for our portion, or will the city issue debt for stations and then we will reimburse part of their debt payment?
The city will issue debt, my assumption. I've not talked to Jeremy, but in the past, they will issue debt and we will pay them back over a period of years. So we will use cash on hand that we would budget in each year to do that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a handle on how much forward thinking we need to do in terms of the timing for stations.
Yeah, and I'd say so generally with what I would recommend we do is if it actually gets in and stays in, that first year is cash for us. City may use a little bit of cash too, but then I could really enter into negotiations with the city about, once they have solid numbers of what that expense would be for the capital, then I could come back to the commission and decide how long, we want to make that payment off. Currently, I think, and Brooks here, Station 1, where the county is paying off its obligation to the city for Station 1, and we set that as an incredibly long time frame to pay off. I don't think we're scheduled to pay it off till 2029. We've done other projects for the city, depending on the total dollar amount, where we've paid them back within 5 years. So you would see it as an ongoing obligation inside your CIP in each year. And I don't think I need to know that for setting the 24 budget. I think it's one of those things that if it is built in for the planning in 24 by both governing bodies, then that allows me time to work with city finance staff to figure out what that plan would be for financing. But commissioners, you also could, we have other cash balances in other places. We could make a decision of we're just gonna pay you all up front. But I don't know that I need to do that right now and this year. I think we could do it after we see where they're at.
First question for Sarah. Sarah, remind me, because I know I should know, our new agreement. Does the agreement stipulate that the city can make a determination on CIP projects and we are beholden to fund those, to pay them back for those? Or is it a partnership agreement where we hash this out like we have done in the past?
We have joint governance. So I think this would be a collaborative effort with the city to make sure that we're that we're working together.
Okay. And the second question I had was, there was a number of things in the county funded proposed CIP. We're talking ballistic vests, ambulance for Station 6 and 7 and those things. Does the reduction at the city impact any of these requests? Because Sarah has included that in her recommended budget, and that would have an impact on our.
The last draft that I saw for the CIP for the city did not include the ballistic vests.
Okay.
And the 2 ambulances that are also part of that that's an annual replacement. We do that, plan for that every year, right? So the 2 ambulance replacements, ballistic vests and helmets, the helmets in or out.
Ballistic vests and helmets were inclusive as a package, so they were out.
So 945,000 for the ambulance replacement, right? That's really what's,
Say that one more time.
sorry, 945,000 for the ambulance replacements, right? Okay. Just make
Correct.
sure I'm tracking all the right numbers, and the right memos.
And tomorrow, if the city does release a draft to the departments, I can send that out. But for right now, it's all just been verbal.
And I've had conversations with the city manager. We're going to do our best just to stay in contact during the next week or so to sort of figure out where they're at. I do think this is one of those things, commissioners, next week, we could have LDCFM come back and have a little more conversation, just finalize where we're at. I do want to kind of keep us moving unless you've got other questions for LDCFM. Or chief. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Why don't you do that while we're kind of talking about ambulances?
My favorite. So in the spirit of replacing ambulances every 2 years, the math has worked out that an ambulance is in service for about 6 years. We do put a lot of mileage on it. We are far away from Kansas City and Topeka. We've got obviously ambulances to our east and to our south that travel a good distance to go to LMH or any other hospital that's nearest to where they should be transporting. So there has been recent conversation, whether it came across your desk or not, because it's been several years in the making, but we will be receiving next week or the following week, depending on when the check can be cut, the 2 ambulances that were ordered in 2021. Right, you can laugh, it's okay. And then at the end of the year or the beginning of the year, the ambulances that were ordered for 2022 will be delivered. And don't hold me on these quotes, but this is the expected timeline. Where we're running into some issues is there were no ambulances that were ordered for 2023. And so we're in this spot where we need to order those ambulances for 2023. So we will have a gap in 2 new ambulances for 2023. But if we were to order those yesterday, tomorrow, or in the next couple of weeks, they're not going to be here till the end of 2025 or maybe the beginning of 2026. So let that soak in for a minute. And then do you have this? Okay, all right. So yeah, sorry. No, that's good. So within that same blue timeline there for 2023, it's our suggestion that we order an additional 6 ambulances to be paid for upon delivery, Commissioner Willie, you're losing it there. And the reason for that is because of the lead time being 25, 26. So we still need to have ambulances for 24, 25, and then 26. So that would be the 6 ambulances, 2 per year for 3 years. We just need to get those ordered in order to have any efforts of getting them delivered on a timely manner.
Then does that take into consideration the 2 new stations?
Asking questions. I don't really have a lot of great news, but
So, yeah, so if we are developing a timeline for Station 6 and Station 7, we also need to be developing that timeline for ambulances. So when do those need to be purchased in order to hit the timeline for 6 and 7?
yeah, so we'd be in the same boat, assuming that it's a 2-year build time, correct? Oh, you mean keeping reserves? Yeah, if at selling our ambulances as a used vehicle, that's part of the process. That's part of it's like you trade your car in and then whoever buys it gets it for whatever they charge. We could keep our reserves if we wanted to and use those as frontline ambulances. And they are often used as frontline ambulances now because of service issues, especially this time of year with the air conditioning going out. We'll trade back into reserve. So we try to keep them as stocked and as normal as possible so that we have that instantaneous switch if we need to. There would need to be some enhancements to those, specifically the cot loading systems, if we were to keep those in service for longer, but that's less expensive than purchasing a new ambulance. But we're looking at that timeline, unless supply chain on chassis increases on what we normally purchase, we're going to be at that 25, 26 timeline. But if need be, we can keep a reserve in service for the new stations. That makes sense.
In terms of mileage being one of the drivers for these aging out and needing to be replaced, and I know our ambulances cover a good deal of territory within Douglas County, but also that transport outside of Douglas County. Are there any ways that could be streamlined or a different kind of process for transfer between hospitals or something like that that would help with mileage and help our ambulances last longer?
I just want to make sure I'm hearing you right. Are you asking, is there a way to prevent us from going outside the county?
No, no, I'm not asking that. And just in terms of, is there some low hanging fruit for ways that we could rethink how we do medical transport, say between hospitals, so non-emergency transport that
Absolutely.
would save?
Absolutely,
mileage.
yes.
Okay.
Hospital transfers and transfers back to home, absolutely.
And we've talked about that before here.
We talk about it, we've talked about it. The problem is there's not a service within the community that does it, and we are that service that has done it. And so we are attempting to have conversations with the hospital to be able to move that forward, because it not only is a drive to reduce mileage, reduce service maintenance, but all of those things is regardless, maybe not mileage on our people, but service and maintenance to our people, having to take maybe unnecessary transfers to and from places that could be handled by somebody different. I promise you, we are making the best efforts on trying to reduce that. I promise you, and I promise our people that. So it's not something I take lightly. I get to sleep in my bed at night, as do all of us. Our people don't. And so reducing not only sleep, but reducing the ability or increasing the ability to train and have time doing firefighting and EMS training efforts. We have to be able to reduce that, because we do a lot. We're over 1,000 transfers per year, half and half being emergency and non-emergency, depends on who's deeming those classifications.
And if I'm understanding you correctly, those folks who are doing those transfers are not available for any emergency calls at that time. And as we're reducing service, reducing the amount of people you have, and I know you said that that's not going to impact service, it starts to question whether those non-medical related transfers are in the best interest of the public safety. Would that be fair to say?
Very fair.
We are working through a process right now with an ambulance service that provides some specialty transport specifically to high-risk pregnancies and pediatrics. And as I review the city-county agreement on ambulance service, excuse me, and the joint ordinance on the provision of ambulance service in Douglas County, it's pretty complicated. So the low-hanging fruit we're working on as a first step in that direction with this organization. And so you'll see, I think, within the next month or two, some language to come before you to provide them with a license, because they need to be licensed by both the city and the county to operate here. And so we do have those discussions regularly, and they're continuing.
One extra real seems insignificant, but will help with reducing mileages. The ambulances that we have in reserve and the future ambulances that we're ordering have what we call a placard on the side. That's a removable identifier. And so if we start to see, for instance, Medic 11 down at in Baldwin had 164,000 miles on it, far exceeds what we normally have. But since it's got a different identifier on the side of it, it confuses when people arrive on scene. We want to make sure that if we're telling somebody to take them in Medic 11 and we're telling them that they need to go to Stormont Vale, and then all of a sudden they put them in something different and they go to Stormont Vale and they should have gone to Overland Park, and we tell the family. That doesn't happen very often, but identifiers on the side of fire trucks and ambulances is for a reason, as we use for ICS and all the things that go along with that. So having those placards as identifiers be removable, we can move our ambulances around and start putting some of the slower ambulances in higher frequency of use. And so that's something that we're trying to do to help mitigate the mileage and service.
Want to keep us moving?
Yeah, we got a time.
All
Thank
right.
you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Please keep us posted as you learn more.
Thank you.
Yeah, so if our other emergency services partners could come forward, that'd be great, and we'll kind of go over the overview. So Robert, Keith. Thanks, guys, have fun. Bye. Have fun. I want to do the overview part again, Tammy.
Okay, let's try this again. So So these, we have members of Emergency Communication Center here, Emergency Management, and Consolidated Fire District Number 1. The cities and Douglas County have developed a new model in their work with WSU Policy Management Consultants for a new method of calculating the city payment to the county for 911 dispatch for Lawrence, Eudora, and Baldwin. Under the new model, Douglas County takes responsibility for 1/3 of the projected cost of 911 dispatching, and they charge Lawrence, Eudora, and Baldwin City a rate based on population for the remaining 2/3 of the budget. The amount reflected in the proposed budget shows those new rates except for the smaller cities of Eudora and Baldwin City. They have been allowed a 3-year phased-in approach to pay the increased amount as it impacts their budget significantly. And those are included in your packets. I did mention the emergency telephone fund earlier, maintains the 911 infrastructure, but we simply use that to pay a Motorola equipment maintenance contract annually, and the rest comes from the ECC general fund budget. Emergency management is also here at the table for this discussion, and some changes for their budget in 2024 include increased cost for outdoor warning siren system maintenance contracts and the alternate emergency operations center equipment maintenance contract. Some costs will be offset and lowered in 2023 by a delay of manufacturing by the siren cellular backup project not being completed until part of the year. And that gives Douglas County a prorated cost. So you'll see a fluctuation in the cost there because of that. The additional funds in the transfer to equipment reserve for emergency management are needed to provide a new outdoor warning siren and any future replacement of the EOC and alternate EOC, which is the Emergency Operations Center, electronic equipment, and EM vehicles. Consolidated Fire District Number 1's budget is prepared with a flat mill levy of 5.5 mils. It's the same as it has been since they were created in 2021. Adjustment to the pay plan does include market and merit amounts in line with the county administrator's recommendation for the county market and merit amounts. CFD number 1 is focused on building their equipment reserve for future equipment and infrastructure needs while retiring as many lease purchase agreements they inherited as possible. And aligning their pay with the current market is another focus of the CFD number 1 budget. And their budget reflects those updates for 2024. I'll hand this over to commissioners for questions.
So we don't have any supplemental requests for these agencies that were not built in. We were able to build in the supplemental requests for the additional consoles for in our CIP for ECC. And built yours in early on.
Yeah, the only one listed on our options was the radio consoles for ECC. So Sarah, I just want to clarify so it's built in. We have CIP dollars. It's a one-time expense. Has no impact on the mill levy.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. Just wanted to
Yeah, this would
spell
be,
that out.
this would be, and Tony will correct me, but sometimes I like to say things around ECC to make sure I understand them because they're very complicated. And I've been working with emergency communications for over 20 years and I still don't always get it. This would max out the number of consoles our center could hold, moving you to 12, 10. And now currently these last ones would not be staffed permanent, like you would not create increase your staffing schedule for it. You might just, that's kind of what I think you
Sure.
hit on.
The back in 2014, when we constructed the remodel, our staffing model at that point in time didn't have enough positions, full-time positions to be able to support the added expense to put 10 fully functional radio consoles into the center because they are very expensive. So from 2014 to today, we have increased our staffing model and we are actually very, very close to being fully staffed. I have one position that I can still hire for. So we take a lot of lot of pride in that for a communication center. But because of that, now we're in a position where we truly do not have enough radios to have everyone have the fully functionality inside the center. So we deemed it necessary to start looking at adding these positions into the center. So that way, at any point in time, if we have one failure in our center, we are at a point where we cannot staff with our current trainees and our communications officers.
Tony, with the additional radio consoles, will that reduce response time, do you think? Will that have an impact on that?
I don't think it's going to reduce response time right now. What it's really going to do is it's going to reduce the stress inside the center. Because right now, depending on what position and who's working it, at times we might have to double up somebody with a trainee, which is not efficient when you're trying to learn a position like this. And we've had to do that a lot lately. So you have somebody working right over your shoulder. And then yet again, that redundancy. Right now, we have zero redundancy. So this would give us the opportunity to be able to, if we had a failure on a system, that we could take it offline and we could actually still function. So the response of the community won't change, but the stress level and the way we operate inside the center will definitely change.
Because Tony will correct me if some of these consoles are now getting close to how old?
All the consoles, the MCC 7500s is what we're currently using, their end of life. This project also is forcing Motorola to give us an upgrade, which is nice. So with this project, we're also looking at upgrading all the other consoles inside the center to the newest technology. So it's kind of forcing them to do this because we want to add these two consoles. Doesn't hurt us if we don't use them because we still have probably about 3 to 5 years on the current technology. But at some point in time, we're going to have to upgrade these consoles regardless.
So is there yet kind of a schedule for upgrades, kind of a routine schedule for replacing every few years? Or is this kind of dealing with it as it comes up?
Well, we kind of are at the mercy of Motorola with these because they service the technology until they deem it end of life. And so because we have an upgrade and service agreement and upgrade agreement with them, they will keep those radio consoles or any equipment functional until they deem it end of life. We were just told that these MCC 7500s, which are the most expensive radio equipment in the center, they just deemed them end of life going into the 2025 to 2027 timeframe. So we still have a little bit of time, but they just told us that this year. So.
And consoles are weird, in terms of like other types of equipment replacement. Like it's not quite like a vehicle where you can just move it around wherever and use it in that way. They're very tied to the center itself. So, and particularly as we start thinking about capital improvement plans and, is this the forever home of ECC and the Justice and Law Enforcement building? You would, in most cases, you'd buy new consoles if you built a new center. And that's kind of what we did here. So we have allocated some funds for replacement. He has an equipment replacement schedule. But we don't replace it kind of you don't replace them like every year you get a new one because there's also these other issues. So it's a little more complicated.
Theoretically, the new consoles, I mean, they could go 14 years. But how Motorola decides what they service, what they don't is truly what can they fix. And if they get to the point where they can no longer fix this equipment, then they'll end of life the equipment. So we see radios right now that have been in service for 20 years and they're still in service. At some point in time, they will deem them end of life. Unfortunately, there's no schedule for that. And with the service agreement that we have and the upgrade agreement that we have with Motorola, they guarantee that they're going to keep that equipment serviceable until they deem it not serviceable.
I know we're getting close to our time.
Go ahead.
Okay, I have a question for emergency management, and that's about
Can I add one thing before we
Oh.
move on to emergency management? In our new agreement with the cities that we're in the process of putting together, capital will be included in that. So I want to be clear in this one, the county is covering the full cost of these console expansions because it was not necessarily discussed as a part of that development process. But moving forward, and one of the things I'm excited about with creating stronger governance and advisory into the process is the cities will help share the cost of these for equipment upgrades. So I'll turn it over to.
Sure. So the outdoor warning sirens, are we adding additional ones or just servicing, or just adding to the cost of the maintenance contract for the ones we have?
So we are adding one new siren location, which is at the west side of Lawrence, Clinton Parkway, and the bypass in that area. There's a newer subdivision that met the threshold for the policy. So that's a new one. And then that's the capital fund. And then typically Blue Valley increases their maintenance contract every year for us. So we're anticipating a 3%. And it's an overall maintenance contract.
I guess my question is, the outdoor warning siren system has been around a long time, but now everybody has cell phones. And a lot of those also do emergency warnings. Is this something that will always be with us, or is it something that will kind of become obsolete as we communicate in a different way?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And we talk about that often. And, you know, people still rely on the outdoor warning system. That's what they count on. It's still a redundancy for us. It's still a tool that we can use to alert people, people that don't have that cell reception possibly in the county, or it's weak, and they have another way to if they're outside to get these warnings. But we do talk about that. Yes, there are lots of ways to get these warnings, and we encourage people to sign up and to get those warnings. But ongoing discussion. But yes, we still think they're valuable. Yeah.
My question may be for Cammie, and I think I ask this every year because I just get fuddled up, but when we look at the budget breakdowns within each department that we have, we see increases, but we often see those increases and they're tied to the budget request for market and merit. Is that correct? So we don't see a separate line item for that. It's just built up to the total amount that we see in our budget supplemental.
You are correct. I
Okay.
can show you exactly which lines equal that, but yes, it is
Okay.
a series of lines.
Okay.
Yeah, there's detail behind that market merit that shows what it is for each department.
Yeah, I'm just making, because we do see different changes in each department, which we don't really go into each one of those discussions, but it's
Sure.
built into that overall. Okay, thanks.
I have a question for CFD1 if we're ready to move there. Okay, the cash basis reserve is a new line item. And can you talk about how that is different from like the equipment reserve?
Why don't you let Cammie do that one?
Can I interrupt just to say that the cash basis reserve line is a new line item because we have found it to be best practice to put that into our budgets. And previously they had a miscellaneous expense line, and that is where we carried their fund balance and we told them not to spend it. And that's just not a very good practice. And you'll see that in most of our funds, we have added a cash basis reserve line, and you just happen to notice it because this is the year where we realized he didn't have that. So it is fund balance. That's the answer. And previously it was on a different line.
And the equipment reserve, I know that's been a planned thing because we started off CFD1 didn't have anything for equipment reserve. So it was 150,000 last year, 150,000 budget for this year. Is that going to be kind of an ongoing, that's the anticipated number, or is there a threshold you're looking for that account?
I would say that the more I can put in there currently right now, the better, because our fleet is really aged. I've got 80% of my apparatus are probably close to 20 or 20 plus years old. And so without knowing, this is our third year. We're completing our third year of the budget cycle. And when we started this budget cycle, we weren't even sure exactly what 5.5 was really going to pay for. We had some hiccups with capers versus KP&F. And some different things. We've been very fortunate in maintaining that budget line and being able to come in under our budget allowance. And so 150 was just a starting point, just to see where we're at. And I think I've talked to Cami. Our goal this year is to kind of look at our budget after completing that 3 years, redoing those object line codes so that we get a better, truer reflection of where money's being spent at, because we just kind of put some things in the pot and called it what it was without really knowing. So
What I would also say is I think it's still a work in progress, Commissioner, in terms of what the standard equipment replacement schedule would be for CFD1. But I think we're evolving in that regard. So I think you're going to see some fluctuation in that number for the next couple of years. And like we said, Chief, any extra funds he has, he puts into equipment reserve.
And there's no planned equipment upgrades in this budget at all? Vehicle?
currently, I'm working with Sarah. We're supposed to sit down next month, or this month, actually, in July. I will be bringing a list and we're going to be working through that capital improvement plan and identifying those resources that I believe need to be replaced and how can we do that most efficiently. We know a fire truck doesn't cost $150,000. Fire trucks today are 4 to 6 on the low end, $100,000. And so we don't still have the cash basis, but if you talk to our fleet maintenance, we need to replace trucks because I've got a truck I just spent $60,000 on this year alone. And it's just not a feasible practice to continue doing that. So we've got to figure out a way, but this is just where we're starting at, just to see where we can get to. And then how does that look in the future years coming up?
Those expenses will probably hit his equipment reserve, not his operating budget.
Okay, yeah, I'll look forward to that when we start having a schedule, because I recognize that you have needs for trucks there.
So my question is just, again, reading budget sheets and trying to understand, when we talked about consolidating CFD1, we knew that there would be some cost to the county to do that. Can you sort of give us a projection of what that cost has been and where you see that now?
I'd say, and Chief, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, I'd say for the first 3 years, the county really has not borne any of those expenses related to the consolidation. This conversation about some truck replacement might put us
Okay.
there.
Okay.
And because his vehicles are getting a little rough.
Right. And I want to be clear to the public, like, yes, our townships are part of the county, but it's a different way that it's funded. We're not going to say it doesn't impact our county residents for sure.
And we've done things in the past, historically in the past with, townships and fire districts where sometimes the county has loaned them funds and they've paid us back, which is basically a paper transaction for us, no interest or low interest. We've done that with radios in the past, and we've done that with other things. There was also some equipment, I think, allocated to CFD1 during the ARPA process. Didn't we put a little bit? No, or did we not? I'm forgetting. Brooke, do you remember? Did we have something for, no, we didn't. Okay, I thought we did. Never mind. Did we have something for CFD1 in ARPA? That's what I thought.
Right. The
So we've
replacement,
got that one.
one of the replacements.
Yeah, so we've got that. So we've done that. Other questions for these partners?
Thank you
Okay,
for coming. Uh-huh.
Have a good day.
thanks. We're gonna ask our justice partners to come up. Commissioners, Katie is gonna kick us off. Yeah, I'm just gonna borrow that microphone and kind of introduce these partners.
Morning, commissioners, and partners. As an introduction to the budget review that y'all will be doing this morning, I wanted to provide an overview of the county's investments in this area. Our partners for these agencies are on hand to answer questions and provide more information to their budget requests and their services. The departments before you this morning, internal to the county for the justice system, include criminal justice services, the district attorney's office, district court, and the court trustee, for which you have cover sheets that summarize their budgets and supplemental requests. And we also have on hand in this group today, Kansas Holistic Defenders, for which you have their community partner budget requests to review. In addition to supporting the operations of our internal justice agencies, I feel like this mic is a little high. I want to remind the commission of two large investments made by the county in this area during the last fiscal year, which are the opening of the legal self-help center in the district court and Kansas Holistic Defenders. The district court legal self-help center director, Brandy Brakovich. I'm too low. Can y'all hear this? Okay. The district court legal self-help center director, Brandy Brakovich, was hired in January 2023 to establish a center that can assist individuals without representation, navigate court processes, and to increase information availability and access to justice for individuals who have interactions with district court. Since her hiring, Brandy has become an active partner to many of our justice system agencies and has worked tirelessly to develop the footprint of the Legal Self-Help Center. The center officially opened on May 1st, 2023 to the public and has continued to develop relationships with our community agencies and exploring opportunities to expand services. Kansas Holistic Defenders' first year of operations was fiscal year 2022, where they were funded to provide defense counsel to indigent individuals facing misdemeanor charges in district court. KHD provided the commission with an overview of their services and outcomes in December of 2022. KHD experienced staffing challenges in the fall of 2022, which resulted in a period of time where they were unable to accept cases and experienced a higher than preferable caseload for their attorneys. They have since returned to full staffing levels, have hired a co-executive director to support the operational functions and growth of the agency, and have continued to look for opportunities to expand their streams of revenue. I also want to point out areas of challenges that you may see in budget requests of these agencies as you consider the budget for the upcoming fiscal year. The two areas I would highlight are related to staffing and caseloads and potential changes to external funding streams that may impact these partners. Adult services of the Criminal Justice Services Department has experienced challenges over the last fiscal year related to changes in the composition of their caseloads, particularly in community corrections. Staff in that unit have seen an increase in higher risk, higher need, and more complex clients at levels they have not previously experienced. You'll see a supplemental request from CJS to add an additional staff to this team to help maintain reasonable caseloads, both in volume and client need. Staffing and caseloads have resulted in some proposed adjustments and new requests in the district court as well. A function of our district court is to provide guardian ad litem and juvenile defense counsel where necessary. In fiscal year 2024 line for juvenile panel attorney fees, you'll notice an increase in funding requests from previous years. We've heard from our judges that there is an increased need for GAL services, which is a large part of the reflected increase in funding on this line. The increase on this line for the upcoming fiscal year is also inclusive of an increase in fees for juvenile defense panel attorneys and juvenile appeals for juvenile offenders. Regarding juvenile panel attorney fees on this line, part of this increase is due to a proposed change in the relationship between the Douglas County Legal Aid Society and the district court. Legal aid has previously been funded as a community partner for many years. However, over the course of conversations with both legal aid staff and court partners, legal aid has served the court more similarly to a juvenile panel attorney. To this end, increase in funds on this line reflect making this change in the funding stream of legal aid to allow a more direct relationship between legal aid and the district court. in a manner that's more consistent with panel attorneys. Despite this proposed funding change, we anticipate that legal aid would continue to serve the court and juveniles in Douglas County as they have previously. As mentioned earlier, a significant investment was made by Douglas County in this last fiscal year to open the Legal Self-Help Center. Since the center's opening, a natural partnership between the center and the work of the county's housing programs has developed, as individuals at risk of eviction can often benefit from legal assistance, not necessarily provided as seamlessly as it is in criminal cases. To continue to support the Self-Help Center's work for individuals at risk of eviction and with individuals who are self-represented in other court matters, you will see a supplemental request for an AmeriCorps volunteer and a grant match for an eviction diversion coordinator position should we be selected for that. Of additional note related to proposed budget changes, the district attorney's office has experienced an increase in the number of cases being heard by jury trials. This increase has resulted in a greater need for expert witness testimony, a higher fee for which is proposed to meet this need in fiscal year 2024. Regarding changes to external funding streams, you may hear from several departments and community partners that there are expected changes coming around VOCA and VAWA funding. It is anticipated that cuts to these services for survivors of domestic violence and abuse can be up to 40% reductions in funding levels agencies have previously received. These funding cuts are most likely to be observed by agencies providing supportive services to this population, which poses a significant challenge in the continued provision of services to abuse survivors. While these funding cuts are not yet known, I flag this as a point for your consideration as you review the upcoming budget, as agencies have begun to prepare for these potential funding reductions. You will see the impact of these potential changes to funding in the budget requests of the Willow, the Sexual Trauma and Abuse Care Center, and the District Attorney's Office.
Thanks for the overview, Katie. Basically, at this time, we just really turn it over to our partners if they have specific things they want to talk about, and commissioners if you have specific questions.
I'm curious if commissioners have a preference for which we dive into first, since we have a collection of partners, if we want to skew one side of the table first.
So we got an email yesterday from Kansas Legal Services and how they'll work with district court.
Douglas County Legal Aid.
Thank you, Douglas County Legal Aid, and how they'll work with district court. That's a question that I would like, if that's a good place to start, maybe with district court, and just how you see those funds working as we transfer them over. There's it was communicated to us, there hasn't been much communication yet on how that will happen, and some trepidation maybe about the impacts on the services provided.
Jim McCabery, Chief District Court Judge. I saw the email. I spoke with Professor Daly briefly in the hallway, spoke to Judge Klepper this morning just about the email, but the topic itself, I can tell you that from Judge Klepper's perspective, Douglas County Legal Aid provides excellent support and services for the cases that we assign their law students.
Judge, could you get a little closer to that microphone?
Their law students.
That's great. Awesome.
So that, you know, their interest level, their energy for the work, and then they have good supervision. So works out really well. And, you know, they take the lower misdemeanor, lower level felony type cases. In speaking with Judge Klepper about some of the questions that were raised in the email, I think his reluctance has been to sort of stay out of the budget side of it and just look at, this is the work they do. This is what I appreciate about how they do, because we haven't had to look at that until this change in funding occurred. The short answer is, if we treat them as a panel attorney and they provide two attorneys for the work, it'd be $24,000 from $40,000. That just raises all sorts of other questions for me. But among the primary ones is how could I justify to our panel attorneys paying a different rate when they're carrying, whether you look at it by numbers or by case complexity, let's just say everybody's doing a lot of work for not a lot of pay. So does that raise the question of, do we need to further evaluate what panel attorneys are paid? I haven't really thought of it deeply enough to speak to it, but it's a question that's raised. But the short answer is, and I think in my discussion in the hallway that sort of confirmed what the expectation was. And then we look at ways that can change. Does that answer?
Yeah, I just wanted give you a chance to respond to that more
Yeah.
than anything. And because it seemed like there'd been some requests for communication that hadn't gone through. So that would mean that all panel attorneys for those juvenile cases would be paid the same, whether they were from Douglas County Legal Services or not.
A panel attorney, correct?
Okay.
How many other panel attorneys are there for the juvenile panel right now, Linda?
So there are 6.
6 is what I thought.
There are 6, and there are 2 positions that are split because of that 6 panel. They take both sync and juvenile offender.
Got it. 6 in addition to, or 6 including the
6 in addition to, we
from
have
Douglas
presently
County? Okay,
6.
got it. So 6 private attorneys separately. And so on that line item, I just want to be clear. Well, I see a bump up in what looks like 24,000. Is that right, Linda?
That is correct.
What the estimated budget and the 2023 budget, help me understand why that's what that $41,000 difference is. It says the 23 estimated budget is 300 and the 23 budget is 341.
That's because when we did the 23 budget, that's what the total budget amount is set at. The reestimate, I don't think we're going to spend all of that this year, so I lower that amount.
Okay, thank you for helping me. Sometimes I fumble through these columns. Once I think I got it down, I confuse myself again. So, okay, so just to be clear, that 24,000 is what you're budgeting in to raise that line item in order to pay the same amount to Douglas County Legal Aid. And
Actually, it's more for the guardian ad litem. So what I would say is that we added the 24,000 for the guardian ad litem. I think there's sufficient budget if you look at the previous actuals to cover the additional 24,000 that would go to legal aid or more, depending on however Judge Klepper wants to use them. We're not capping them at 24. We're just saying that they will be paid directly out of the juvenile panel attorney bucket.
thank you. That's a helpful clarification, Sarah. And I guess but currently, is there any sort of tracking within district court of the amount of appointments, juvenile appointments specifically across those, 8 attorneys in total, if we count Douglas County Legal Aid? Like, do you have any sense of what the breakdown of what that spread of cases and appointments is across that panel? Or and I guess where does the 24,000 come from? Like, what is that number based on an expected number of cases that each attorney would take? Is that how I'm to understand the formula that you've been using?
I mean, that's not the way it's proposed to the attorneys. It's,
Okay,
we'll pay you $1,000 a month to take whatever appointments we may come our way. And Judge Klepper has told me, specifically with Douglas County Legal Aid, on the level of cases that I talked about, their willingness and ability to handle those, does it free up some of the attorneys who have the higher level cases and then they don't have to have that volume? Absolutely. So I don't think it's a case by case comparison. You got to factor in some of the complexity levels. And
got it. Thank you. That's a helpful clarification, the per month. And if you said that before and I missed it, I apologize for making you repeat it.
I would want to note that I did not get the email, so I'm not quite sure what the communication concerns are, but I would say that when juvenile reform happened several years ago, we did not change pay for juvenile panel attorneys either. And caseloads are substantially different. And now after juvenile reform, so I would want to go back and kind of look at some of those issues if we wanted to talk about raising juvenile panel attorney pay.
Thanks for that. Let's stay with district court here. County has made a big investment in Kansas Holistic Defenders. So when I read that there's been an increased line item due to the amount spent for misdemeanor defense counsel after KHD started, can you give me, and Sam's here, and I'm glad Sam, can you give me a little more context on why we've seen that increase and we're paying Kansas Holistic Defenders? What's happening there?
And I might want to start before I let the judge answer. You know, I would say I recommended lowering the 2023 budget, and I probably lowered it too much. So, you know, that budget used to be around $400,000 a year, and I lowered it to 100, assuming the impact of KHD would take most of that load. And we had those conversations when we funded KHD about, we moved some of those funds from there. And so that was on me, not necessarily the judge. Judge can talk about volumes and cases.
Well, my recollection is we talked about that topic and it seemed reasonable. And now that it is been higher than we expected, I haven't really sat down to try and figure out why that is. I can tell you, I think KHD's been doing excellent work and they take the cases that they can and they've never complained. You know, if they have a conflict, obviously they let us know that. It's a higher number than I expected. And I just haven't had a chance to sit down and figure it out. So it's not very helpful other than to say, I agree, it's not what I expected, but we were guessing. And that's what I know.
What are the variables that could go into that? Is it just caseload, case numbers?
I mean, it would be driven by case numbers. And I haven't stopped just to compare the number of misdemeanor cases we have. I don't know if Mr. Allison Natali has a different thought on any of that, but
and I would say I'd like to, I mean, Linda, I think some of this stuff would be in the old full court system because of from 2022. So it would be nice to get good volumes of what hit that line item. And if is that a piece of, I don't know how quickly you could come up with that information for the commission. Could we have it by next week or not?
So that's a difficult thing to achieve because our court case management system looks at cases. It doesn't necessarily pull out when a case is, we can tell you when a case is assigned, we can tell you when it's finished, but that doesn't mean it tracks with the same year. And then once it's finished, it depends on how the vouchers come in. So if it's a felony, it goes to state. If it goes misdemeanor, comes here. And so it's just it's a labor intensive work is what I'm trying to tell you. And then of course we've changed court case management systems and that's changed a lot more of our practice. So it's possible, but I can't tell you when I could get that for you.
But it is something that as I've started looking at some of these numbers and some of the questions, and with some of the changes and additional people we have in our staffing to do those sorts of analysis, because I'd like to know, not just because you're asking. But.
And one of the things that I can tell you too that occurred is that bids, because there is a shortage of attorneys. If you look in Western Kansas and other places, that was one of my calls that was just on prior to this meeting, is the shortage of attorneys. And so bids upped the compensation rate. And so the same thing happened in Douglas County.
That's true. We matched that increase. So that's a 20%. Went from 100 to
So
120.
all of those variables played into it. But otherwise, I mean, I think even when we all met with Sarah, we were like, I don't know why this is so high. We thought this would be lower.
I think, thank you for pointing out that I knew that the compensation went up. And so that certainly had to have some impact. Maybe doesn't account for all of it. Judge, you said, you know, it really comes down to case numbers, and that does seem, I mean, ultimately true, the number of cases filed. Is it fair to say it's also the length of time or the well, we heard just earlier, and I'm sure, you know, DA Valdez has perspective on this too, that more cases are going towards jury trials. So there's increased costs in a variety of places because of more cases going to jury trial. But is it fair to say that both the length of a case, the lifetime of a case, and sort of I
It's
don't
fair.
know what word I'm looking for, but also like the depth of it, right? Like if it, okay,
The time of resolution per case
yeah.
plus the
And-
number of cases, multiply that out, that's billable time.
And more jury trials equal
I'm trying
increased
to think if we've had any
expenses.
misdemeanor jury trials.
Can you use the mic, Sam?
Sorry.
And introduce yourself.
Thank you. So our office did, we've set probably over 100 cases for jury trial, but we've only had one actually go that went last year. It was an acquittal. And I am aware of maybe 2 other misdemeanor trials that went to jury last year. I have some thoughts on possibly why that number is higher from my view, if that would be helpful.
Well, I think there's a lot to unpack in that, and I'm glad to hear that like the court is trying to figure out where those numbers are skewing. And it sounds like there's more to sort of study and figure out long term. And I'm curious, DA Valdez, do you feel like the handful of trials, misdemeanor cases going to jury trial, does that feel about right? Certainly more of them go to trial as felonies, which is bids.
It's my understanding that, and Mr. Allison Natali may have a different perspective, but certainly what we know in our office is that it is their practice to set everything for jury trial and to have motions practice, all those things that did not necessarily occur before their involvement. That takes time, it takes resources, those kinds of things. And I think it's also had, their practice has had an effect with other attorneys who are doing the work as well. That accounts for time. And again, I'm not responsible for their budget, responsible for my budget, but I can tell you based on what we're seeing is we're putting in a lot of time and resources for that practice. Also, you know, to the point of billing time for, if you're talking about private attorneys turning in a voucher, again, not my lane, but the longer these cases go and they're continued or there's process in place, the attorney has to put in their time and they should get paid for the work that they're doing. It's always the state's interest, in the best interest of our cases, to move these cases quickly, expediently, of course, keeping in mind defendants' rights, all of those things. But just anecdotally, that's what I would add to the conversation.
Thank you. And Linda, I do recognize the challenges in getting that information, but personally think that it's something I want to put a little bit of a pin in for today, but think that later this year, like we need to study and try and understand that better. I think there's a lot of moving parts to it. There's been lots of changes across our landscape in the criminal justice system in recent years. And so I think there's a lot of factors and pressure points potentially. But it would be helpful to try and understand some data that helps us start to tell that story or understand where it might be happening. Or maybe it's just kind of, you know, a little bit of willy-nilly. There's some factors that we can't totally pin down, but I'd like to understand it better if we can.
Judge and I were having that very conversation. We were saying if we could figure out like per case, per hour, you know, and those are the things that we're hoping to drill down on.
Yeah, it's like, as it comes to number of cases, whether it's a lag time that we anticipate that KHD, Kansas Solicitor Defenders coming online will impact the 24 budget as opposed to the 23 budget, or if it's a cultural shift in how many misdemeanors are going to trial, that helps us kind of plan for future funding. So thank you.
It also helps us communicate to the public if there's an increased cost for misdemeanor trials. It's helpful to have that information to share that with the public. So I want to be cautious of our time. We can spend a lot of time on one thing and we've got a couple of different supplemental requests here. Is it okay if we move on to a different one, commissioners? I'd like to hear a little bit more about the eviction diversion coordinator position and how that would work with the help desk position. Those are two that weren't included in Sarah's budget, but her recommended budget. I'd like to hear a little bit more about those positions.
Yeah, yes, please. Brandy's on vacation in Nashville, so she's zooming in.
Brandy,
Good
you're in
morning.
the panel.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, can you hear us?
I can. Thank you, Judge.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right. So if I heard the question correctly, it was you wanted a little more information about the eviction diversion initiative and the self-help. Is that correct?
Yeah, that'd be correct. I think I understand the eviction diversion one. I need a little more context on the AmeriCorps worker for self-help. There just wasn't a ton in there for me to grab onto. So a little bit more about the need for that.
So, Douglas County Self-Help is a Douglas County mission based on the commissioner's goals and objectives. With there being one of me right now as we slowly grow, we saw the AmeriCorps option there, and we thought it was a really great way to link in through the strength of the Lawrence Public Library to connect in with Eudora and Baldwin City and make a really natural fit for the self-help to be able to expand there much more rapidly, both with resources forms, knowing when the attorneys would be at the Douglas County courthouse, and actually make sure that the people facing eviction or other things, that there were resources countywide, but maybe real focused in Lawrence. This position would allow Eudora and Baldwin City to have the same access to those resources that those of us in Douglas County residents in Lawrence would have. So some of those resources would be if you're facing eviction and unstable housing, knowing where to go to get rent assistance, eviction processes. If you're a victim of domestic violence, knowing where you can go there. There's just a lot of resources that Lawrence has for Douglas County residents that, but for me physically leaving the office, which would reduce office hours, that Baldwin City and Eudora does not have. So this position would be linked in. AmeriCorps workers are also going to be located here in Baldwin City and Eudora, so there were 3 of them online, and there'll be a great interchange and connectivity between them.
So the concept on the AmeriCorps, that person would be in Baldwin or in Eudora, not at district court?
They would be in district court, but they would be connected to the resources. So there may be office hours in Eudora. There may be office hours in Baldwin City. It really just sort of depends on what all of those places need as it results to self-help. But the goal is to get essentially a full-time person in those areas where I cannot physically be right now, and brings them on board before we needed to ask for a full budget support for an entire person with that information. So it allows us to grab the statistics, see what people actually need, provide the resources, and ensure that everyone is getting the same access, regardless of your ability to walk to the Douglas County Courthouse.
That's great, Brandy. Thanks. In the future, just as a commissioner, I would like some data that shows the need in those areas, that sort of outlines what data you're looking at that's telling you that we need that kind of outreach in those communities. I'm not saying we don't. I'm just saying I would like to have some of that information.
I understand. We opened on May 1st to open to our hours. And I know we've had 69 folks come in. I know we have had at least 6 of those have been Eudora based. I haven't seen anyone from Baldwin City that has listed that. So it'll be really interesting to see if they don't need it or if it's an issue that they didn't realize we exist because they're just a little bit farther out.
I do think it's one of those things that, I think this comes up from time to time when we think about a variety of county services. we can't necessarily duplicate all county services in all three communities. So how do we link people up so that they have information and knowledge and they feel comfortable coming into Lawrence to do that? Not everybody in Lawrence walks to the courthouse. So how do we sort of make those things available, but not necessarily, I don't think it's realistic necessarily to replicate all the services in each community, but how do we get information out so that they can come here to access those services?
And I think it's completely fair to say you'd like to see some numbers. I think this was Brandy's thinking beyond Lawrence. And I think if I can say, my sense is it's her way of finding out, is there a need there? And having this person sort of be that first foray into gathering that data, getting some feedback, and it'll either be something that grows or we'll say, that's not really a cost-effective way to spend self-help center resources.
Would they be there the whole time?
Oh, no, I don't. Well, I'll let Brandy speak to those details, but
Okay.
Thank you, Judge. Absolutely, that is correct. No, they are going to be primarily focused in the Douglas County Self-Help Center. I apologize if that was unclear. The goal is to keep them here with us, but to build the statistics, to get the feel, make sure we're using the self-help the way that the people that you are funding it for need it. And yes, so absolutely what Judge is saying, this is my attempt to kind of get some of that information. We may find out it's not necessary at all because it's all handled very well. We might find out. Yes, I don't want to overspeak it. I apologize.
Well, and I'd like to add too that, part of our hope is that we will also provide services for people outside of 8 to 5. People work 8 to 5. And so sometimes I think there's a gap there of being able to have something available to you, whether it's at the Lawrence Public Library, whether libraries seem like the logical nexus for us in order to branch out. So we're kind of like reaching our hand out in directions to try to figure out where our need is and what we need to do to fill it.
I would anticipate in that you're right, Baldwin and Eudora would be the communities that to dip into, but I don't want to leave Lecompton out of
Right.
that conversation because we have 4 cities within Douglas County.
I apologize. I'm still learning a lot about Douglas County. Yes, but that is also what Linda is absolutely correct. What this does is we can do some eviction resources. We can do some small claims resources. We can do some family law clinics. We can do those sometimes on the weekend. We can do those occasionally in the evenings to really make sure we're hitting the folks that maybe can't get to us in that traditional 8 to 5 area.
This is Commissioner Reed. So my question is probably best for you, Linda. So this is a relatively small request. It's a host fee for an AmeriCorps member. What I'm hearing the conversation is telling me that the idea behind it is that it might help identify kind of what some capacity building could and should look like long-term, help you determine whether or not AmeriCorps year after year felt like a good fit or maybe a stepping stone to larger staff, right? And I think that that's
Correct.
a smart idea. I'm a former AmeriCorps member, super supportive of using that program to explore capacity. But I'm curious why the ask came to us and whether or not you explored room in your budget for district court to just pay the host fee and explore that way. Why ask for the funds through us?
So normally when we do our district court budget, we're basing it on what we guess is going to happen the next year. Obviously, we don't know how many crimes are going to be committed. We don't know how many, there's so many unknowns. And so it's not that our budget couldn't absorb because it's literally $8,000. And I've spoken to Sarah about that because the position actually starts September 1. And we have been granted that position, is that we will try and just take it out of our budget, but we want it to be for certain and to make sure that there was definite monies there for this position. So that way it also brought it before your attention so you could see our direction, what our thought processes were. We could hear your voices and make sure that we were all kind of on the same mission plan.
Thank you for that. I do have a question about the eviction diversion thing. Do either of you have any more questions about the AmeriCorps ask? Okay. I just want to, so the request is for 50% for this year with the expectation or the hope that it would be fully funded by the county in the future. So I appreciate the narrative, but it leaves me uncertain about what the grant is actually. Help me understand the grant that we're applying for that only pays for half a position and might not have future availability, or I'm just unclear why. I'm used to grants that tend to be, I mean, some grants are 1-year cycle, of course, and matches are not that uncommon, but I'm trying to understand that better and what the sustainability of it is, and if it's the only sort of grant option for this type of position. And then also what's the timeline of that grant? Like, do we already know about it? Are we what's the timeline?
Would you like me to take this question, Linda?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So I did email this morning, and I have the authority as far as it goes to budget hearings to say that we have been selected as one of these communities. We have been selected for this grant if you were to choose to match it. So we're super excited. It's a National Center of State Court grant, which is pretty prestigious. It is also the State Office of Judicial Administration has applied for it 2 years ago and currently runs an eviction diversion initiative in the city of Wichita because it has the largest number of evictions in the state. So with our housing support, the goal is to really kind of get in there and see what we can do for landlords and tenants, right? Their relationship to make it less costly for evictions. How can we provide the supports earlier? What are the things that you can do? Does everybody have fair access to the table? Or is there a situation that's put in place that's costing landlords $1,000 to evict and also costing tenants, and we can really close that gap. Those National Center of State Court grants are not traditional grants where they just keep you funded into perpetuity. They do want some sustainability from the court, because when you get a National Center of State Courts grant, you are basically a mentor court for anybody else that is looking at those initiatives. So that is why it is a 2-year grant cycle. They do 50%. Was it 50% at the it's 100% the first year, 50% the second year, but the way their fiscal year goes, it kind of looks different for you all. And then the third year, they can't commit to anything yet, but they feel like there'll be some sort of support there, but they can't commit to that because they're trying to bring as many courts and eviction diversion initiatives on board as possible. I think there's several $1 million that they can award each year to bring that in. So that is why it is asking the courts to put us with support. They'll give us the statistics building. You work on a national level with everybody else, and the agreement is that you do sustainability. Now, their sustainability is not the same idea of a lot of grants, where one grant position now, a full-time grant position now, means that you have to do one full FTE into perpetuity with this grant. It could mean that once we get it set up, that it really looks like that it's a half a FTE, and then you can support it other different ways. But to get it going right now, it is a full-time position to coordinate the statistics, to do the outreach, to be the contact and the navigator for that. So that is sort of what that looks like. They can also, although it's listed as an eviction diversion initiative coordinator, that is the primary spot, but it can do anything that kind of touches that. So if they are during office hours, obviously this position would go into the eviction docket to provide the information and the help to both landlords and tenants, how to answer and what to do when they get their writ of judgment. They would go to the trials just to make sure that there is no attorney fees and things like that that can get mixed up in the mess. They will support
Randy,
building.
Randy, I'm sorry to interrupt. Thank
No,
you for
thank
that. I just want to keep us on time a little bit,
No,
because
that's
we've
fine.
got some other partners to talk to. So just to clarify, 100% the first year is what this grant would cover, 50% the second year, no commitment third year.
Correct.
Correct.
what is their fiscal year and how does it butt up against ours? And just because the request now is for us to commit to 50% for next year.
So it's actually on the federal fiscal year. So the position would start, or the funds would be available by October 1.
My assumption is if the commissioners do not fund this request, they would not accept the grant.
That is correct.
And then because we have a commitment we need to make in the future years. So what we've put in is for 2024 for that. And it's showing here at 45,919, but that is showing what it's at a 50% match.
And that's for half of the year. And I don't think it would be for half of the year. We haven't got all of those numbers. And just kind of as a side, and I know your time commitment is very precise here, is these grants are very selective. And one of the things when we were interviewed, first you have to apply, then you're interviewed, as they were trying to get this, the diversion coordinator positions in every state. And they're not in every state, and this state already had one because the Office of Judicial Administration had selected, but they were very impressed with what Douglas County had already done for housing and for evictions. And so our also hope was to provide some type of what's working with Sedgwick County and what's working in Douglas County, what works in this state, maybe parts of both, maybe only one. And so hopefully the statistics that we could gather and may provide impetus for other states and understanding how best to approach evictions.
Yep. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm excited. I'm excited about it. I just wanted to
The budget side.
understand the budget
Right.
piece of it and how it's helpful to understand how the 2 fiscal years overlap and what that specific grant program says in terms of the way that they phase out their funding, I guess. So it helps me. Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologize for the lengthiness. I've just realized it's very hard on Zoom to gauge what questions are. So thank you for your patience with me.
I guess I would just request a little better breakdown from year to year, and that doesn't seem like it'd be that difficult to provide us. Maybe by how much are you asking for next? What I want to be cautious about doing because of the cash basis law is what we're committing to in the future. So if it's a 2-year grant cycle and we're agreeing to a 2-year match, that's a little tricky for us, right? So if you could give us maybe a little better timeline of
Absolutely.
what dollars we'll need in next year's budget
Absolutely.
and
Okay.
what
And Linda-
you may ask for in 2025, that would be helpful for me.
I can do
And
that.
Linda, I just would like to step in and say, Commissioner, so you know, we made the National Center of State Courts very aware at the application of the Kansas cash basis law. So they know that there is no, even though that's what the grant requires, that there is nothing in place that guarantees that you would fund us next year, even though you did initially think this year you might.
So can you get us that by Monday?
Yes.
All right.
Can we move on to a new
Yes,
topic?
please do.
Okay. Cami, you had mentioned some changes in the VOCA VAWA funding, and we have several requests that are linked to that. Can somebody give me some more background on that's DA Valdez or Cami or who would like to?
I think it was Katie that mentioned that,
Okay,
not
sorry.
Tammy. Sorry.
Right,
Uh,
so far down there.
But I
We have 2 supplemental requests from the district attorney based on those funds, and we have some partners that are not today's conversation.
I think the district attorney can probably best answer the questions related to her positions.
So I think Katie hit the sort of general issue, which is federal funding for both of those 2 grants has been cut significantly at a national level. Both of those, VOCA and VAWA, the funding flows to the state and the state disperses it, whatever that amount is. Over the last couple of years, we've been told that funding has been cut, obviously, and then the state gets to decide how it's distributed. Thankfully, we have not experienced any cut to our prosecutor position or to the victim witness coordinator position that supports the DV work. However, we've been told that it's possible. Certainly other community partners that were just listed by Katie have suffered up to 40% cuts in funding. So what it does on our budget is it shows as $110,000 as a revenue source to and those two lines, one for the prosecutor position, the other for the victim witness coordinator, then their salaries are augmented so that their pay is equivalent with everyone else. And of course, considering merit, and of course, their benefits are paid for by the county. But we risk losing that funding. I just wanted to let the county know, it's not going to get any better. It's probably going to get worse. Furthermore, the limitations on what we can do in our space for federal funding, the federal funding is very restricted. So both the prosecutor position and the victim witness coordinator position have very strict requirements on the type of cases they can handle. So it's almost become very cumbersome. That's from the DA position. So I went ahead and included it. Wanted to make sure that the commission knew that that $110,000, it comes in as a revenue source, is very fragile and will continue to be, and I don't see it getting any better. So the request would be to convert both of those lines to county funds.
When do you think you'll find out?
We've secured the money for this year. Going forward, though, it's very precarious and it's been this way for a couple of years. I finally, after really doing some deep dives on it, decided to let you all know about it. I just don't think we can count on it.
So that didn't answer my question. When do you think you'll find out whether you're getting the money for 2024?
We have, gosh, that's a good question. Both of those grants come in at different times. It is secured. Let me see, do we know exactly?
January.
October and January, because they're two different grant sources. The other thing too is it kind of depends. It goes to the grants office and sometimes we're told we're getting the money or we think we're getting the money or decisions haven't been made. So if I'm not giving clear guidelines and timeframes, it's because sometimes we don't have it.
So we have two more funding requests that we need to work through. We have one from CJS and one from Kansas Holistic Defenders. Do you have a preference, commissioners, on which one? Okay, so let's do Kansas Holistic Defenders first.
Just as commissioners are flipping to that, I want to remind you, your partners have been prepared for just answering questions, not
yes.
presentation. So if you don't have a question, you don't have a question.
While we're flipping to that, I just have one last question about the DA's other request. It's really for Sarah, though. For a vehicle replacement, will you just for our purposes and for the public kind of talk about how we do vehicle replacements and where we, I guess, pull from based on different departments? For example, does every department have every department that uses cars have its own line for that? Or is that something we purchase countywide?
So it's a little bit different depending on the department. Most departments who have a vehicle have an equipment replacement fund to source the vehicle. The DA's office does have an equipment reserve account. It's pretty low right now. So there's not quite enough in there to fund buying a whole new vehicle. I would just say right now it's super hard to buy vehicles. They're really expensive. We don't have a lot of hand-me-downs. And so we're doing our best kind of countywide to sort of manage that process. But there are countywide pool vehicles that are needed. The equipment reserve for the administrator's office is going to cover that. So their equipment reserve is just a little low.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought I interpreted from the budget line item, and then maybe DA Valdez's the 45,000. What's that based on? Just because
I didn't know, it was so random.
Yeah,
All
I
I
just
know
wondered
is
if
that
we-
fleet cars.
It's a guess that
It's a
we have
guessing
right
game.
now,
Okay.
depending on if
Yeah.
it would be just
that's kind of what I figured. I
sedan.
get that it's a squishy
Yeah.
number. Just
It-
wondered based on recent car purchases.
And the good thing, so just to be clear too, we have two investigators who serve process and do other investigative function for the DA's office. Both of those investigators are fantastic. Their cars are old. I gave we did the rundown on mileage and all of that upkeep. So just letting you know, it's something that we need probably sooner rather than later. I know that fleet costs for cars are expensive. Unlike law enforcement, which has to have a certain kind of vehicle with all the equipment in it, we don't need it. It's just for our investigators to drive around in.
I would say that in this particular situation, it could be seen as a one-time request to kind of get us caught back up, and then hopefully over time we can get their equipment reserve built back up. Thank you. I guess now I want to move to holistic defense.
Yeah, so my question really, and thanks for the narrative here, on the last page, you talk about the severe mental illness that makes up the KHD clients and extended periods of pretrial detention. Are you working with Burt Nash at all? Are you working with what I want to make sure is that we're not overlapping services. We pay for lots of Douglas County voters, pay for lots of case management and those types of things. And I just give me a little more background on why the services we currently have aren't working.
This was, I guess, what we got told when we first asked for a social worker. And I was like, oh, there's plenty of social workers who are out there working with people. And that just is, or at least there was a concern about the overlap. And in our experience, that has just not been the case. So right now we have 300 cases, about 18 of those cases, only 18 of those cases are in pretrial detention right now. And I say cases because I don't have the information pulled up at my screen about how many clients that translates to. Some of those have multiple cases, right? But really there are a handful, a small percentage of our clients make up the vast majority of people in district court misdemeanors who are held pretrial. I think everyone down the line here has a number of names that immediately leap to the front of their minds as people who keep showing up, right? And as far as working with Burt Nash goes, or in pretrial, reentry. So for instance, reentry, one does not have social workers on their staff, right? And the work that they do because of that is excellent, but one, limited only to people who have a specific release date. That is, they have a term of jail time with a definite end to it. That's when they start typically working with that population, which doesn't often overlap with our population because our folks are typically not being sentenced to additional jail time. If there is a plea, then it'll be a plea to time served. They'll be getting out that date, or they're just in until the case proceeds on a litigation path, in which case it's dismissed, they get released from there, right? And so, but even with that, there isn't social workers that are in the mix in the same way that we would need. So for instance, Burt Nash, our advocate, works with, there's one individual in particular I am thinking of who has been arrested, prosecuted about more than a half dozen trespass cases. And we were told by her caseworker at Burt Nash that she was first on the list to get into their transitions program. And months would go by, and that's the only news that we would get from Burt Nash. Oh, there's a big list. She's first on the list. Well, then we find out that actually they'd been letting other people in the program. There was some requirement, additional requirement they told us about now that they would like her to do before getting her back on the list there, right? And this is to say that the services that are available, like in terms of Burt Nash case workers, those are the homeless outreach team, which targets a segment of our clients, but not the ones who are often, not just the ones that we're talking about here. We also have people who are in jail and getting Burt Nash services in the jail, but that doesn't account for most of the services that we really need. For instance, forensic evaluations, right? Saying, hey, what does this person have? What is their diagnosis? What are their needs here? For assisting defense counsel in preparing, say, mitigation documents or release plan, that is something Burt Nash will not do, does not do. They've told us, do not ask us for any kind of forensic mental health evaluations. And so
Okay.
the short answer is yes, we are doing we are trying to we're working every single angle with every service provider that currently exists to get things for our clients, and those are insufficient for the level of need that we are seeing among the population that is driving rates of jail for misdemeanors.
Katie, are you taking notes there for a future CJCC meeting? Yes, thank you.
Well, I just want to add to, I guess, the question or comments for Katie in particular, that it's my opinion, we need, I mean, it came up just last week during our work session with the housing and homelessness strategic plan, to really have a better understanding of the current capacity that exists across our spectrum of mental health services and behavioral health, crisis intervention, social services, and our criminal justice partners and offices, where there's a lot of overlapping Venn diagrams and there's a lot of different names for sometimes the same kind of work that we all call things: case management, social work, advocacy. Those mean different things to different people in different offices. So first I want to say to you, Sam, like in the original request, for me personally, as one of the 3 commissioners that participated in that discussion, a takeaway for me was not that there was too many or that there was already enough, but more so that we had a conversation about needing to understand what the capacity levels are. This is a conversation we keep having in our community. It keeps getting worse, quite frankly, for a million different reasons that we could spend all day unpacking. But we need a better sense of that instead of just adding same or similar positions everywhere and anywhere that feels like they need it, because the point is that everybody needs it. I also, part of the discussion for me in that original year was about the appropriateness of a social worker who is a mandated reporter in a legal office versus other places that your office may work with. So that is a point for me that I just wanted to state for the record again, that that's really what I take more issue with than anything. And on a system-wide, zoomed out scale, I want our commission to be able to have a good sense of where all those investments are and what types of services are they meeting, and where are there inefficient like duplications, and then where are there gaps and opportunities that are not being met. I don't think we have a good sense of that right now. So that's just my 2 cents about that. And then I also want to ask KHD about, and I'm looking for a brief answer to this. Whether or not, well, it's 2 questions. You take some Lawrence municipal court cases on occasion, is that right? Or only when they're co-occurring?
This is a thing that we have experimented with on a case-by-case basis in situations where someone's municipal court case was driving the resolution of their district court case. Currently we only have 1 client whose municipal court case we were taking, and we did that specifically for the purpose of asking municipal court to transfer it over to district court. They didn't, and so we're going to continue to resolve
Okay,
that.
so it's not a very common practice.
Correct.
If it becomes one, I mean, have you been in discussion with the city about payment for those services or an appointment?
We have not yet.
Okay.
But that is something that
Just wanted to gauge whether or not you were doing a lot of criminal defense work at a court that wasn't paying you for it.
The short answer is more than we would like to, less than I think would be driving some scarcity on the district court side.
Second question is about civil court. You talk in your in the budget narrative about a specifically funded civil attorney that's mostly Shawnee County with a little bit of capacity for Douglas County cases.
Yes.
But you also mentioned that your criminal defense attorneys are sometimes supporting with civil legal cases as they relate to your misdemeanor client cases, correct?
Yes.
I'm just gonna leave it at that, actually. Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Pam had a budget request. Do we have any questions for Pam?
I would like to just hear a little bit very quickly about the additional position and what's driving that request.
Well, let me just state that I don't have an opinion about the level of people that we're supervising, but currently, as of today, we have 252 active community corrections clients. 6 full-time officers cover that caseload, so that's about 42 clients per person. The high-level people, which we consider level 1 and level 2, then we have 133 clients currently assigned to us. That leaves that means 52% of our clients are high risk, high needs. We supervise 48 people in courtesy supervision for other jurisdictions, it's a fairly large number. And then we have 71 clients that are level 3, level 4, and ICOTS, which is interstate compact. We also have a total of 325 people assigned. 73 of those are AWOL or absconded or incarcerated currently. So we have a large number of folks, and my staff are very concerned and very stressed and impacted by the number of high-level, high-needs people that they're responsible for to ensure the community stays safe, and that we can help these folks be productive citizens in our community while maintaining the safety of our community. So we feel like we just need more support to cover those clients.
How long have you been at the staffing level that you are now for that position?
Oh, gosh. And I want to say we have 2 half-time positions that do programming. So it's not that we just have 6 staff. We have some people who do programming with our clients and do decision points and smart recovery. And we also have a full-time community service work person who also trains to do programming and helps with some supervision. But we've been at that staffing level for quite a few years. I don't think we've added somebody since I came on.
I'd say I don't think you've added anyone in specifically community corrections since we moved that to under Pam's supervision. We've added other resources to the criminal justice services team, but not specifically with. And oh gosh,
2017.
Yeah.
End of
And
2017.
it's important to note that, we receive funds from the state to operate community correction services. So this would be in addition to that grant requiring more county tax support. And in the past, it was sort of the mentality of not trying to add more resources to that effort unless the state was putting in more resources. So this would be it.
And the state did fund significantly more money, but it really basically covers more of the salaries and benefits of employees, which is what we were paying more of from the county funds. We did get a care coordinator specific to criminal justice this year. That person's been really active, and we've been using them a lot to avoid probation violations, court services, and my staff in all of our programs with adults can refer people to care coordination. And we have the care coordinator participating in our intake process with our community corrections clients so that they understand that there's a resource to try and help them get engaged in services. So we're doing a lot of things to try and augment just supervision. But really since COVID, it's really more about support and trying to help our clients be productive and also be successful and get the services that they need more so than like the hammer of violating them. We really wait a long time. We try and work with them on different ways to try and get them re-engaged versus just sending them to jail. So it's a big difference in the focus.
Pam, I'm going to preface this by saying I know this could be an annoying question, but is there any context or any state organization that shares caseload, what the average caseload size is for criminal justice services?
That's a good question. I really don't know. I can reach out to other directors and find out. Ideally, when community corrections was started, the whole premise was small caseloads to deal with high risk, high needs folks. That's really kind of gone by the wayside. There's really no rhyme or reason for the numbers of clients versus the number of staff that you're given. And typically it's been done historically, like you had funding for this level, and that's the funding you've always been given. So I don't know what the logic is, but I can certainly reach out to other directors and find out what their caseloads look like.
Yeah,
We
That
we
just for
probably,
me, that would be helpful.
yeah,
mean,
and I
read
would
your
say,
caseload,
just
yeah.
preface this by saying, we feel very blessed that we get the support that we get from the county. I mean, I can talk to other agencies who receive nothing. And and the Department of Corrections really views it as a partnership with counties, and counties are supposed to provide some funding for community corrections, but in many cases, they don't. So we really, I can't say enough about the support we see from the county.
Okay, commissioners, anything else on this? We're not doing very good on keeping on time, but we'll catch up, I'm sure.
I knew this would be the longest hour.
Yeah. Thank you all very much for being here. Appreciate it.
May I request
Yeah,
a
we'll take
5-minute
a
break?
5-minute break and then we'll kick it off with the sheriff. We'll be back at 11:22.
Jimmy, would you be here for this? So we can go?
Yes. We're recording.
I think so. Yeah, we're recording.
Okay, great. Welcome back, everybody. Sorry, if you're watching online, we had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we're back. And we'll start with the sheriff.
Katie has
Katie's going to give us a bit of a overview.
It's going to be very brief compared to the last one. So as with the last group of partners, I just wanted to highlight a couple of pieces of overview for the sheriff's office proposed budget for the fiscal year 2024. The most notable highlights for the sheriff's budget are related primarily to staffing requests and investments. You've heard at previous commission meetings from Sheriff Armbruster about the staffing challenges that he has faced in his agency with recruiting and retaining employees, as well as the challenge of competing with pay levels of neighboring law enforcement agencies. These challenges are not dissimilar to those experienced by our other local law enforcement agencies and law enforcement agencies across the country. Additional staffing requests from the sheriff's office will be found in supplemental requests related to increased IT capacity to support the sheriff's office, with the addition of a network administrator, the addition of a part-time coroner scene investigator to support death investigations, an additional office clerk to support the increased capacity and efficiency of records and civil service process. And sheriff and his staff are available for more in-depth questions.
So Sheriff, here's my first question about your pay request. What percentage on average is this an increase across all sheriff's department employees?
What is okay, what was it again? What is the average increase across?
So like
all?
one of the things, just to give you, we look at rate for the county, right? We look at average market, merit, and longevity pay. And we say that that's a 3.4. What is in Sarah's recommended is 3.4% average. What average is this for your organization?
This package that I'm requesting. Okay, so it's not, the package that's being requested is not for all employees. Okay. But it's probably like a, yeah, because it affects just specific positions. But as far as just an actual, we'll just take one position, take a corrections officer. It's a 3.5. Oh,
Go ahead.
I didn't do my math right, so I
Okay.
was hoping you, I
What I
hope you
was-
filled me out.
I guess what I'd say, if you're looking for an estimate, the sheriff's office has 7.3 built in, and that's just under $1 million. So 1.3 would be probably close to 10% if it was across the board, maybe 9.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
I think it's around that, but
Yeah,
it would not, but to be clear, this pay plan does not go to all sheriff's office
Right, yeah,
employees.
I did
So
not.
please do not report it in the paper as a 10% increase to all sheriff's office
That's
employees.
exactly right.
Yeah. I guess I'm trying to get to when we think about, and in your narrative, you had some discussion about in the past, we haven't seen increases for deputies and corrections officers. And because of that, you're wanting to do a large catch up here.
Correct.
And so I'm trying to get to picture of when we think about our Douglas County employees on the whole, and I consider our sheriff's deputies to be that, you know, what's the increase to them versus to the rest of our Douglas County staff? And so that's just where my brain is going.
And I believe that is exactly what you were elected to do. And I was elected to support my staff. Well, I am a part of the county. We are taxpayers. We are part of this entire overarching universe, this government. It's my job at this point to be selfish in the fact that I can't compare my staff to other county entities because they don't do the work that my staff does. So it's an unenviable position for me to attempt to say that we are worth more than anybody else within this government under this umbrella. But we've reached a crisis point to where we can only tick off certain things when it comes to hiring or retention that are within our control and some that are not within our control. Pay and culture are two things that are within our control, and pay is the one place that we feel we have got to do some work. So that is what this pay package is trying to knock that one thing out so I can concentrate on the things that are outside of our control or that I feel like we can do better. But this is one thing that we feel like we can make work to keep us operating at the level that we have been operating at and continue to serve. And that's the thing is we do so many things that people don't know. And I'd love to talk about all of them, but that's maybe not the thing for today. But pay is one thing. We have an internal morale committee. Two things that there are the only two things on their list: pay and the amount of hours that they are forced or that they feel like they have to work in order to help this agency. And morale, supervision, leadership, those are things that are not on their list. Pay and the number of hours. And if we can put the pay up, the OT and number of hours, I believe will get fixed in that same capacity.
Sheriff, you mentioned we've had conversations about it here as a commission before with you before. You mentioned it in part of your memo to us. Had conversation with the three of you recently about this. Talk to us a little bit about Kansas Highway Patrol and whether we've made any sort of progress on conversations at a state level about what the actual cost of that is to our sheriff's department. And for the public that might be listening, just a bit of history is that, or the summary is that there's one officer from Kansas Highway Patrol assigned to our county at this point. Historically, population of our size is 7 officers. Is that right, Sheriff? And our county has adapted, and we have very sophisticated and great response to accidents on our highways that are very busy in our county. And that's a significant cost. And I'm just curious where we are, if we're anywhere on that conversation, because that's a particular pressure point that stands out for me year after year in these conversations. And then a second question after that is, can you give us a sense of like actual cost of overtime? Do you have any ballparks about like what you've increased the amount of overtime and required overtime, right? What is that fiscal impact?
And to clarify on the cost of overtime, are you asking specifically in the vein of the KHP versus us or?
No,
just as-
sorry,
okay,
I don't
all
mean
right.
to connect them.
We
No, just
absolutely have that.
generally about overtime, because it's, we were sort of having a discussion with LDCFM earlier. What's that cost
You
of
bet.
overtime versus if there were increased staff capacity?
So, okay, go ahead.
Not have numbers, but I know that when part of the conversations we've had, you talked about your minimum staffing levels
Yep.
and the number of vacancies. I think you could kind
Yeah,
of give us
okay,
a little
we
bit of
can totally
background
do
on
that.
that.
Well, we're on pace to go over budget for overtime this year, I'll tell you that, but we'll get to that. So let's do the KHP, the state versus versus county. Douglas County, 475 square miles. Within it, we have not only I-70, we have multiple state highways, K-10, 59, 56, 40. The branch of what is now 40 highway, but I will forever call it the South Lawrence Traffic Way or the bypass, from 59 highway around to 6th Street is the busiest 2-lane highway in the state of Kansas on a daily basis. So there is more truck and car traffic on that little loop per day than any other 2-lane highway in the state of Kansas. We have a population of what, 130, 120 and some change for Douglas County. So based on the number of highways, the miles of highways, the population, the traffic, we should have about 7 highway patrol troopers assigned to Douglas County. In late 2021, I was told by the colonel of the highway patrol that they were 65 troopers short across the state. And so, this is a common theme across all law enforcement, everybody's short. He was hoping to, he even came out and said, sheriffs, I'm coming after your deputies. I'm going to raise pay and I'm going to try to steal your deputies because I need state troopers. But if I steal one from you, I'll put them back in your county, which is not a consolation in my opinion. The thing is that throughout the last, so I've been with the sheriff's office for 25 years. I was on patrol for 16 of those, if not longer. We've always been short troopers. I think the most that I can remember, we had 4 or 5 at one time. And even then we were still having to work calls, but at least we had the availability. In the last 3 or 4 years, we've had one trooper, and that trooper has been a very good trooper, but he has other responsibilities throughout the state. So he is not always in Douglas County and he only works 40 hours a week. So that leaves everything else to the sheriff's office. And in 2021, we had a little misunderstanding with the state about some stuff, and we actually presented them with numbers, the number of calls that the sheriff's office had handled that should have been dispatched to a highway patrol trooper, and it was 8,000 calls. Now that was including road rages, car stops, and things that occurred on the state highway. So that was 8,000 calls that the sheriff's office handled that the troop should have handled had they been available. On top of that, we work multiple fatality wrecks on state that occur on state highways. And we've learned to do that because we've had to learn to work without. But what we've done by expanding our abilities and our presence is that the highway patrol has come in and said, well, then why would we even send you troopers if you guys can handle everything on your own? So the thorn in our side is from a tree that we have planted, so to speak, in that we have done such a good job of taking care of our community that the other entities are like, well, you guys are doing a great job. I need to send these troopers out to Rooks County, out to McPherson County, and therefore we're completely overlooked. On top of that, I'll tell you this is, again, we're back to the urban legend. There's state troopers and there are administrators within the highway patrol that don't want to place troopers in Douglas County because they don't believe that our community and our court system is set up correctly. And they don't want to put them in a position where they're not going to be able to serve justice. I believe that's unfair, but that is something that we hear. And then we can get to the overtime money later if you have a follow-up question on that specifically.
Just to put it in a perspective of where Douglas County has over 80 miles of state and federal highway that we cover. That in the past, we've maybe had 5, 6 troopers. If we have 1 now, we're covering that with 4 to 5 deputies. So,
and that's the thing is our staffing has lowered. So we're again doing more with less. Thank you.
And I appreciate the illustration and doesn't really impact exactly what we're here today to decide on, but I feel like it's important to highlight because that's a significant pressure point on the cost and capacity of your department. And in my opinion, the state should be paying us for it.
Yeah.
We should be paying you for it. If they are not dedicating deputies based on population size and their numbers across the state, and they're 65 people down, then maybe they got some money to allocate to county departments that are doing that work. So I don't know exactly where those conversations go from here. And I don't know how much, our, the administrative staff can support the sheriff's office in those conversations, but it feels like one that we need to continue having and really try and get to the bottom of, because for me personally, it's not an acceptable answer that we just adapted so well that we will never get the sort of coverage or assistance meant from the state again. That's not an acceptable conclusion to me. Yeah, that's all I have about that.
I would also draw a little segue over into our corrections in that it's very similar when we're talking about Larned State Hospital and the wait times. The cost of housing and treating and caring for those individuals who are on the waiting list for upwards of a year is borne completely by the county. So at any given time, we've had anywhere from 7 to 11 people on the waiting list to go to Larned State Hospital for a competency evaluation and or a restoration. And those are some of our most high intensive users of resources within our jail. And the county is footing the bill to watch, maintain, keep safe, stay safe from these folks. So it's another place. Now, there's some mechanisms now in place legislatively to try to pay the counties back. And I hope that that works out, because we deserve it, frankly. But it's the same kind of thing, is that once again, the state has created a situation where the county's got to pay them. We got to bear the brunt of it. So sorry, editorial over.
Katie, I think when you started off, you mentioned something about a position that was related to coroner's services, and I don't have that in my notes. Can you talk about
Thank
the
you.
change there?
So this is not a new position. So when we built this coroner scene investigator unit, we didn't know what we didn't know. So we said, well, let's do 3, I can't remember what we decided, 2 full-time and 4 part-time. And whatever it was, we got fully staffed, and they overhired by 1 part-time person because they're having to cover not only calls, but on call. So they're 24/7. That position is currently being funded. It is currently filled. We just need to get it added into our budget. So it's not a new position. It's just one that we realized that was something that we needed, and we have filled it. It's operating. We just need to make it, I don't know, official. I don't know.
Well, it's built in. So, and because it was related to part-time FTE, that was built into their proposed budget.
Yeah, yeah.
And just because we knew there was some flexibility. I mean, we've been having to adapt with this adjustment. So that's built in.
So this is basically tying the loose ends of us not knowing when we built the unit, what it was going to cost. This is the last piece. So from here on out, anytime we come back with a RFP or whatever, it will be because we need to hire a new person. That's not the case this time. All right.
When I read your sort of the math on how you used a 14-year, and one of the things that I was taken by was that putting corrections officers and your deputies on patrol at the same pay level. Is there any bit of training that's required between a corrections officer and a deputy on patrol?
Well, so first off, the deputies we have in our corrections facility, we have corrections officers, and they can only work within the correctional facility. But we also have deputies who work in the correctional facility. So it's not just patrol, but in order to become a deputy, there is a training that you must pass. And we pay for that. So there is a difference in certification. However, when you're comparing a corrections officer who works in the jail and a deputy who works in the jail, 90% of the time they are doing the exact same job, shoulder to shoulder. The only difference being is that that deputy can go on a transport or can go down to booking and fill out the arrest paperwork because they are a certified law. Those are the things that corrections officer cannot do. But 90% of the time, they are working side by side doing the exact same job. Does that, I hope that kind of clears it.
Yeah, that does. I was just sort of surprised, and as you sort of broke out that it seemed to be about years of and nothing about training.
Right.
The pay schedules that I'm familiar with, and the reason we moved to different levels isn't just about years. It's also about your expertise in that, and that you have to learn more skills in
Right.
order to get to the next level. It's a way of increasing the capacity of your organization and providing a financial incentive towards that organization, and not just who sticks around the longest. And so I will just say, I noted in your statement that you said a pay study, leaves you disappointed. But I will say, I having looked through the spreadsheets that you sent, more detail would not be bad, and more study of understanding the difference between police departments and sheriff's departments and what their expectations are, what their benefit differences are.
Sure.
We have really good benefits in Douglas County, and I'm not sure that's true in every other county. So while pay is important, benefits are also an important incentive. And I think I want to, and we're getting a little bit into too much deliberation here, but I just want to give you enough feedback that I think the whole picture is not just pay and culture, that there are other things that impact whether you can recruit or retain. And retention is now the new recruitment. You want to retain them. And so having higher pay levels on people who stay rather than the start, because you don't want to train somebody at the beginning only for them to leave and go to a higher paid job. So I just think thinking about that.
Sure.
Something I just want more thought into it.
Sure. And what I would say is that we do have, I totally agree with you that we have very good benefits here. I also know that 22-year-old Jay started with the sheriff's office, first off, for $9 and some odd cents an hour. And they kept saying, you've got really good benefits, really good retirement. And I'm like, I'm just trying to get to G. Willikers before they close at midnight. I didn't care about that stuff. And we're hiring down at the bottom. We are an inverted triangle that we're trying to rebuild the basement every day and just keep lifting it up. And we can talk about benefits to these folks. And frankly, they don't care. My wife cared. And then she was the one who's like, yeah, you got to stay here because they got really good benefits. But I would also say is that I've kind of derailed my own.
Okay, while you're in the middle of that, we
Yeah.
have two ways of doing benefits now. We didn't have that a couple of years ago. So I think it's a pretty complex picture from a human resources standpoint about how you recruit and retain. And I think we need to look at that entire picture. Do we need a different, I'm going to be sorry for saying that out loud. Do we need a different benefits package, that reflects the difference? If you're looking at younger, and that may be where it is. I think I appreciate the work that's in here. I really do. And I really think we need to raise pays for our deputies. This is a huge ask. Sure. This is giant. And so I think we'll have to have some deliberations, and maybe there's a middle ground that we can do something.
Sure.
And I just want to throw that out there, so that you all have time to think about what that might be.
Right. And what I would simply say is that, in my opinion, recruiting and retention are two different things, and benefits helps us with retention 1,000%. Because again, these young kids come in, don't know, but once they get a taste of it and they realize, or like me, a super smart wife, like, this is really good, and you don't know it. So that helps us to keep people. But I understand what you're saying as far as this is a huge ask, but I think Major Bunting has something he wanted to jump in.
Just a couple of things, Commissioner, in kind of a response to your first question on if there's an average increase. I don't think it's fair to put any type of average on it, because the bulk of these pay increases are at the lower pay grades. We focused on corrections officers and deputies. I understand perfectly what you're saying with the training and whatnot, but I think nationally, there's been a tendency culturally to treat corrections lesser than law enforcement, even though they play an equally but different vital role. There's been movements since the 1980s between national organizations to increase pay parity between the groups, which gradually it's coming around. That is also what we're trying to do. If you had any idea and just I personally invite you anytime you would like to come by and see some of the work our staff do out there. I can't say enough positive things about them and the challenges that they go through every single day dealing with that difficult population. And they don't get a break. They interact with some of our most challenging population 12 to 16 hours a day with no break in between. Their job is equally as important as deputies who they are working alongside of doing the same jobs. The pay, there is a difference. Like, for instance, when you talk about benefits, deputies receive KPNF retirement where corrections officer would still receive capers. So they would still have a better retirement system, even though the pay is equivalent. There is no, back to your original statement, you may have so for instance, I'm throwing out numbers for example. You can't fairly put a percentage increase for this because it varies by person, the time they've been here. And it also depends on if the commission so choose to support this, which option package that's chosen, it hugely varies. So for instance, I'm just going to throw out an arbitrary number. Let's say a pay range goes up 10%. That doesn't mean everybody gets a 10% pay raise. It depends on a lot of factors. For instance, how long you've been there. It's based on the same exact calculations that the county's last pay study was done, except we utilized for this pay study about 89% of the people that we've hired in the past 2 years have come from Douglas, Johnson, and Shawnee County. We are not competing with Western Kansas. We're competing with our own local area. We chose as many agencies in our local area that we could to use those pay comparisons. And our numbers were derived at that using the 70th percentile. So I don't think, I understand what you're saying, the differences in police and sheriffs. The primary thing dealing that police don't typically have corrections to deal with, but it's our contention with this that the jobs are equally important. There's corrections is that segment of law enforcement that people rarely think about, and our people do such an outstanding job that you hardly ever hear about. And they're the ones keeping the public safe from, at night from the people that are meant to be kept secure and safe until they're.
I want to be clear that I didn't say I thought corrections were less than deputies on patrol. My question, my question was, is there a different level of training that's expected? That's all that I said. So this narrative that I agree, I think our corrections officers are very important. But I was just asking about whether there was a different level of training that would be expected.
No, and I wasn't trying to apply that. I'm sorry if I came off that way. I just wanted to express the emphasis on, that you can use the levels of training as incentive to get higher pay, but what we're really focusing on is not that level of training. We're focusing on the importance of the work that they're doing and the same type of work you're doing. I apologize if I came across for trying to imply that you were degrading it. I was just simply saying we're focused on the importance of the work versus different levels of training. So
So this pay package that's being proposed, it doesn't touch any of the management staff, is that correct?
That's correct.
I just want to make sure that that is
Yeah.
kind of stated out
Yeah.
loud, that
Yeah.
those of you sitting at the
I
table
am not
are not.
getting a quick raise.
Right. So what levels are seeing a pay raise? Corrections officers, deputies, where about those middle ranks? Are those part of this or not?
Yes.
Captain and below.
Yeah, it is. So the bulk of
Below
the pay
captain.
raise, the bulk of the pay raise will be for entry level corrections officer, deputy. There is no civilian staff included at all. So this is just uniformed staff. And then our middle management, what we would call middle management, our sergeants and lieutenants would realize a pay raise. Nobody above at captain and above. So captains, majors, undersheriff, sheriff will receive 0 pay raise, which is the way it should be. Our base starting is where this needs to work. But with the caveat is that all pay ranges will be adjusted. So I don't want to say that there is absolutely nothing happening above captains, but their pay ranges will be adjusted, but there will not actually be an increase in pay for command staff.
Market and merit raises would apply to everyone, just like they do to county staff, and then
That's-
this is in addition to that.
That's correct.
Thanks.
Any other questions for the sheriff? Okay.
Commissioners, I don't know how much time you have. I have warned our land records and taxation partners that they may get pushed to another day. I don't know how much time you have. We could try to move through those requests pretty quick if you can go over noon a little bit.
I'm good to go.
I can stay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Come on up. Tammy has an overview for this one.
I don't think we'll go that late. Thank you.
While our land records and taxation departments join us, I'll go ahead and give you the overview. I'll be here. Yeah, all the microphones are down here, guys. You want the low?
The kid table. There used to be a kid table. Go ahead.
So we have our appraiser here today. Most of the costs for this department are contractuals related to the annual printing and mailing of property values and other duties. There were a couple of personnel changes made within the 2023 budget. The admin assistant position was eliminated in favor for 3 appraiser 3 positions. And as costs trend upward, sending out property valuations look to increase for 2023 and 24. They do have a supplemental request for an appraiser 1 position. The county clerk is also here. The Kansas legislature passed new legislation requiring the county clerk to now hold a presidential primary election. This adds a 3rd large election to the 2024 election calendar. The legislator has promised to reimburse funds for this election, but they have not allocated any of those funds yet. So it is unknown what amount the reimbursement rate will be. The overtime and most contractual expenses in the county clerk's election portion of his budget reflect the addition of the presidential primary to the election calendar. We also have our county treasurer here today. The treasurer's budget is located in both the general fund and they have a motor vehicle operations fund. The revenues in the motor vehicle operations come from vehicle registration fees and satellite fees collected from vehicle renewals and registrations. The motor vehicle ops fund is not keeping up with the pace of salaries necessary to maintain the motor vehicle staff. To accommodate this in the short term, the budget for the treasurer and deputy treasurer positions are actually paid from the treasurer's department in the general fund. The fund balance in motor vehicle operations will continue to trend downward as expenses outpace the revenues of this fund. In the future, more personnel expenses for the treasurer may have to be considered for the general fund or increasing satellite fees or both. The treasurer is also responsible for the investments of county funds. The interest earned in recent years has been minimal, but with the increase in the national interest rates, short-term investments are earning quite a bit more interest than last year. The projection for investments in 2024 are on target for a significant increase in interest earned revenues. And Adam Rains is here today for any discussion about those revenues, those trends, and his investments. The Register of Deeds is also here today. Their budget is made up mostly of personnel expenses with very little change. In 2019, the state legislator created a phase-out plan to terminate the mortgage registration tax and replace it in part with the filing fees for recording documents at the Register of Deeds office. These fees fluctuate depending on the interest rates for refinancing or purchasing property market. It largely depends on the housing market. In 2021, Douglas County collected $1.4 million in Register of Deed fees. In 2022, we collected $895,000. The current trend of those filings to date in 2023 look to show significant drop in revenues collected. The anticipated drop of those revenues in 2024 is possibly as much as 40%. Kent Brown is available for discussion on those. I did forget to mention that the treasurer's office also has 2 supplemental requests for 2 positions in motor vehicle, and he's available to discuss those as well.
And commissioners, I'd say, I think on Monday, when we kind of do our summary, we will talk more about revenues. So just given our limited time, if you have questions about their base budgets and expenses and supplemental requests, that'd be best for now. And then we can talk about revenues on Monday.
So Mike, I just have one question for this group, and it's for the appraiser's office and the request for that additional position. And I know you haven't been there long, so yeah. And we've seen an increase. We got that chart that showed us the increase. Is that common when we see property valuations go up higher? And then I would think as property valuations went down, you'd have less requests for review. Is that fair to say? Got to hit that green button. Okay. There you go.
No, the work is the same regardless of whatever the market is doing. And so if the market's going up, we need to study it the same way on when it's going down. Most of this is related to the appeals process and the increased volume with appeals. And so we need to have staff readily available. The time calendar for the taxation process does not change. And so we have to put a lot of things on hold to accommodate the appeals. And so we're usually playing a lot of catch up during the summer months to get through the basic study of the market, picking up new data.
Yeah, I asked my question poorly.
Okay.
It's that as valuations increase, you get more appeals. As valuations maybe hold steady, do you get?
It goes both ways. I mean, you could look the most two recent years, yes. But when the market was slow and steady in the mid 20 teens, we had some spikes in appeals in that area too. And so I think the expectation from the public has increased for transparency. And so they want to come in and have a conversation and understand that better. And they're wanting more information from us, and that needs to be professionally put together and then have all that information ready to go for them. And so that's what this related to as well.
Thank you.
So I'll follow up in terms of staffing levels. So that the narrative says that they've been working at top efficiency for many years. So have there been any increases in staffing in the appraiser's office for the last few years? When was the most recent one?
Roughly 3 years ago, we had an appraiser 2 added.
What's the total staffing?
15.5 right now.
Thanks.
Any other questions for this group? All right. Oh, okay. Thanks for sticking around. We will close out our hearings for today, and we will pick it up again tomorrow at 9 o'clock after we have a 5:30 business meeting this afternoon. Thank you very much.